yo, yo, yo. What a holiday it has been. And now we're back like we never left. Back like we never left. There we go. We're up and rolling. Some big videos dropped. These guys were putting in work before the holiday, I'll tell you. Ashikai drops a video on Christmas Eve. Are we serious? What is that? What is that about? What's up, what's up? Oh, my music's gonna cut out for a second. It's looking good now. It is crazy how going to the 2K matters so much. Love that. Alright. I think everything's up and going. Jeez, it feels like it's been like 13 months. It's only been a week. It's only been a week. Now, I wish the camera UI would actually hide the entire UI and not just say, press Control H to show the UI. That'd be great. I would appreciate that very much. But that's okay. Well, off rip, dude. We're hopping right in. Oh, not that. Ashikai's got a 1 hour and 10-minute video that she decided to drop on Christmas Eve, I think, 3 days ago? Yeah, so it had to have been, because it definitely wasn't on Christmas. There's no way that was on Christmas, right? And I saw it, and I was like, this is the video I have wanted to see. Because, throwback to our old videos, you can't time travel. There is no time travel. Time travel isn't real. It's an illusion. It is a paradox. It only exists in paradoxal form. Paradoxal? That sounds right. Paradoxal?
Bizarre time.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa. Everyone got popcorn? Grab popcorn. Go grab popcorn. You had time to get popcorn. Because we got an hour and 10 at least to go through this thing. Grab popcorn. Notes and corrections, none yet. This is all factual. How to change the past without traveling through time. A Genshin Impact theory. Not factual, actually. Theoretical. Ashikai, I have one hope in this video, and it is that you bring up Alice. I hope Alice gets thrown into here a little bit. We need some Alice. You are my last hope. My last hope. You have to bring up your thoughts about Alice. Somewhere in here, please. Somewhere in here. All right, here we go. Here we go. Let me know if the volume is too loud or too quiet. I think it'll be good though.
There's definitely some kind of weird timey-wimey BS going on into that. I mean, just look at the bootstrap paradox in the Space and Time for You quest, or the Infinite Samsara in Sumeru's Archon quest, or Wanderer's selective timeline deletion shenanigans, or planting a seed from the present in the past somehow. There's just too much bizarre time-related weirdness to ignore, really. And everyone has their own theory about what's actually going on here. Some say it's time dilation, others say it's mere memory manipulation, courtesy of Irminsul, but the bulk of people seem to favor the time travel theory. Especially now in version 6.2, because if there's no time travel, then how would the long-dead iridescent moon know Columbina's name before she even got to choose it for herself? Sure.
She gonna go back on her word already. Look. If she goes back on her word already, well, I guess it really wasn't her word. It was just a previous theory. But I really like the way she laid out the whole bootstrap paradoxing and the fact that there's no real time travel. It just makes sense. Because realistically, at the end of the day, time travel is just an illusion. Like, time travel is like your broad scope, right? But you have everything inside of time travel. Just saying time travel isn't enough. At the end of the day.
Surely the power of the moons transcends time itself, allowing for travel between the past and the future, right? Lunar time travel could also explain other things in the recent quests, like maybe it was Columbina from the future who erected the barrier over Hisi Island during that one fight with Rerir. And listen,
Perhaps.
I'm not gonna poo-poo anyone's theory because I think the whole time travel thing is actually a pretty logical conclusion to come to, and it could very well be the
She's
correct
not gonna name any
conclusion.
names?
But I will play devil's advocate here because I personally despise time travel. Just the thought of being able to go back in time and change something so you can fix the events of the future, it's yucky. Besides, I don't actually think the rules of Tevat as we know them allow for time travel. Time manipulation in some way, sure, but not time travel. Because if we could time travel and then change the events of the past, then why didn't we, I don't know, stop the cataclysm from happening? I mean, if Columbina really was traveling back through time, why didn't she stop Rerir from becoming a sinner in the first place? Something just doesn't add up. There has to be something else going on here. And I think that with Durin's help, I can prove it, or at least make a really good case.
Holy shit, dude. She's about to cook so hard right here. I've been saying there is some relation between Durin's, well, not relation, but you know. You can conclude the moons and the shades and the powers and everything that revolves around that aspect of the game by using elements of how Durin's story quest was told. I just didn't take the time to do it. So did she take the time to do it?
For it. And that's what we'll be doing today. And you all know the drill by now. We've got timestamps, spoiler warnings, links to related content in the description box if you want them. And we're also going to have some post-video notes and corrections in the pinned comment.
There are none.
We've got a lot to cover, and I don't want to make you wait any longer. So let's just dive into what we know about how time works into that so far, shall we?
Take a look.
So this debate about whether we have time travel or no time travel started way back in Inazuma upon the release of A's second story quest. In that quest, A received a magic seed from her sister Makoto's residual consciousness, which A then planted within Makoto's realm of consciousness. The seed then took root in Inazuma's past and grew into the sacred Sakura tree in the real world. So basically, A sent a seed back in time so it could grow into a tree, thus changing Inazuma's history and also its future. Well, that certainly feels like time travel to me. I mean, however, just look at the travelogue summary. It says the sacred Sakura moved from the present into the past and that A walked from the present into the future. That's straight up time traveling. Or is it?
I don't
think calling this time travel makes any sense solely because of the location where this event took place. Remember, we weren't in Tevat when we did this. We were inside Makoto's mind the entire time. And the seed of the sacred Sakura was nothing more than a thought given shape. A thought that was born within Makoto's mind. But if the seed is only a thought, then how did it grow into a real tree without time travel? Well, unfortunately, we need to look at a few more examples of funky time shenanigans in order to answer that question.
Funky time. Ooh.
And the next time anomaly we encountered was in Sumeru. In the Sumeru Archon quest, everyone in the city was sucked into a dream where time looped around itself in a samsara, with everyone's memories getting wiped between each cycle. Many saw this as foreshadowing. Perhaps time in Teyvat is cyclical, like the dream samsara in Sumeru. Set aside the cyclicality argument for a second, we'll come back to it.
Yeah,
what
please.
I want to point out is that once again, the time shenanigans are only happening within the collective consciousness, within the mind. And that makes sense because the cognitive realm is the one place where time has no fixed structure. We even saw evidence supporting this during the quest with A, because the traveler described time within Makoto's realm of consciousness as moving backwards and forwards at the same time. Now, generally speaking, we think of time as a continuous line, made up of a series of individual moments.
I love graphs.
If we were to conceptualize a single moment as a photograph or a snapshot, then the mind is merely a box full of photographs. These snapshots of memory have no fixed position within the box until they are perceived. Only then do the photographs arrange themselves in a very specific order. In Simulanka, Bobarano told us something quite similar.
Well, actually, my view is that the illusion of time is more of a problem of consciousness. Gears power the body, while the body is the vessel of the conscious mind. But the mind cannot understand the dimension of time, so we experience instead an endless continuum of moments as the pinion of now turns along the rack of ages.
So
it's all perspective, some E equals MC squared type shit. You know what I mean? Einstein. Perspective. Nothing to do with the formula I just said, I don't think.
Essentially, the mind cannot comprehend the true form of time, so when the mind perceives moments, it places them in a continuous order. And the order of these events would be determined by the law of causality, which states that cause determines effect. The moment a jar breaks must be preceded by the moment the jar falls.
I'm not dropping a can.
So moments exist independently, but order themselves when observed, and the order is dictated by the law of causality.
Right.
What's funny is that Bobarano said all of this in response to Capet, insisting that you can turn back time by using a key to make a clock tick backwards. And this is kind of true in the case of Simulanka, but not actually. There are puzzles in the game where you do rewind time to an extent, but all you're really doing is watching history repeat itself. And before anyone says anything, I know that there are some instances where you do rewind time and it looks like you're changing past events, but if you stop and think about it, you'll realize that what you're actually doing is preventing the law of causality from being broken within Simulanka. For example, this little guy was never supposed to fall off the cliff. There exists no moment where he has fallen from the cliff. So if he were to actually fall, causality would break. And that is why this little guy is frozen in time. So the only thing that we're doing by rewinding time here is putting him back to the moment before he falls so that causality isn't broken. To me, this is damning evidence that you can't travel back to the past and change the events that occur because it breaks causality, and causality defines the flow of time.
Well, also, what if you just look at it as a storybook? Like, that part wasn't, like, is that kind of what she's saying? Like, the part isn't written in the storybook of when he actually hits the ground. So what you're doing is, since that part wasn't written, you're making it so it's like he's not pausing. So you're making it so that part where he goes through the rope isn't even a thing. So you're not even left on like a cliffhanger of, oh, what happens after he falls? Does he hit the ground? Does he this? Does he that? No, you're just totally preventing that part from even happening. Kind of? Ish?
Time. And before you tell me that Simulanka isn't Teyvat, so it has its own laws, let's go back to Sumeru and check in with Wanderer in the time before he was Wanderer. At the end of the Archon quest, Nahida sent Scaramouche and the Traveler into Irminsul to look for information on Descenders. But in the process, Scaramouche learned the truth behind some of the events in his past, so he tries to change the past by altering Irminsul. This certainly isn't an example of time travel, but effectively you're trying to do the same thing, right? You're trying to change the events of the past. You are trying to alter causality. Now, Irminsul is kind of like the collective consciousness of Teyvat. It's the memory of the world, if you will, which makes it very similar to Makoto's realm of consciousness, just on a much larger scale. And like I said, Simulanka established that the past cannot be changed because it breaks the law of causality, so Wanderer cannot change the events of the past. All he can do is erase his name, and this causes everyone to forget who did all of those things in the past, but the events themselves remain unchanged. This fact used to be somewhat debatable, but now we know for certain that this is the case because in version 6.2, Sandrone recites something that Wanderer said to her in a time before he erased his name, but she doesn't remember that it was Wanderer who said it, even though he's standing right in front of her. So that event still took place. Wanderer was still the one who said those things to her. She just forgot it was him. The past remains
I remember that part. He started to give a little bit too much away. And Arlecchino was like, you seem to know a lot about what the hell is going on in the internal workings of the Fatui, buddy. Kinda suspicious. And we all know if Arlecchino thinks something is suspicious, she's going to investigate it. And if she's going to investigate it, he is cooked. Coming up, he's gonna get leaked. All right? Arlecchino's gonna find out who he is. Believe that.
Changed, even when it forgets your name. And you can extend this logic to what happened to Rukkhadevata. She made the world forget her too, but that's all. The events of the past never changed, and we know this because her name still exists on a throne within the Eternal Oasis. Now it was around this time that my fellow
And time is frozen there, perhaps protected by Easteroth.
Oasis. Now it was around this time that my fellow theorist Roosevelt and I started talking about the possibility that Teyvat wasn't following a linear timeline model, but a block time model. And Mawika all but confirmed that to be true in Netland.
Most people perceive time as a linear concept, almost like a straight line that can only move forward. We cannot change the past or predict the future, but there's also a different theory, one that I believe to be closer to the truth. Namely, that the past, present,
we learned
and
about
future all
plenty
exist.
of times, but look, if you've been playing Genshin, Honkai for any time over the past 2 years, you should know about the block model, okay? And if you don't, you need to hit up Wikipedia right now or watch a video or something, because anybody who's been playing and paying attention should be an expert on time by now. You know what? That's a lie, because none of us are experts. Why is this? None of us are experts on time right now, but we're getting there. We're learning a lot.
Once.
Like Mawika said, block time, or eternalism, argues that every instant of time exists simultaneously, but humans are only capable of perceiving this omnidirectional function of time in a singular direction, which, again, is literally what Boberano said in Simulanka. This asymmetric perception of time, moving from the past to the future, is called the arrow of time, or the perceived arrow of time. Now, the direction the arrow of time points in is determined by two important aspects. The first is memory, which indicates the past, and the second is volition, which indicates the future. Volition is
memory, fully, past.
Kind of like the result of the choices that you make in the present that influence the future. Those choices that you can make in the present are sometimes referred to as free will, or just will if you believe in predetermination. And most block time models are running on the assumption that things are predetermined. And given that Genshin heavily emphasizes the unchangeable past and the unavoidable future, we can assume that Teyvat is also operating under the assumption of predetermination, which it likes to call fate or destiny. So if the events of the past cannot be changed without breaking causality, and thus destroying the concept of time itself, then I can probably end the video right here, right? Case closed. There's no such thing as time travel. Except
we have a lot to go.
Even a staunch time travel hater like me has to admit that this idea of absolute predetermination is at odds with Genshin's main theme of changing your destiny, or reweaving fate.
True.
So there's definitely something missing from this picture. Something of the timey-wimey variety. Enter the Space and Time for You quest, which took the bench time travel theory and threw it back in the ring, all thanks to the existence of this stupid key. I've made a whole video about this key, and while I don't have any desire to revisit this stupid bootstrap paradox, it is necessary, so here's the short version.
Dude, I just remember trying to figure out the timeline of the key and who holds the key, and then the graph is all hooked into one thing, and it's like, oh, there's 3 keys actually, but wait, maybe there's 4, maybe there's 2, maybe there's a key A, B, C, Maybe.
Of the story. About 500 years ago, the twins allegedly arrived in Teyvat, but
Allegedly,
woke up
I like
separately.
it.
The Abyss twin woke up first, but found they had a mild case of amnesia as they were unable to remember their twin's existence. Over time, their memories began to return, but despite looking for their twin, they were unable to find them until a Conrian girl named Deirdre showed up with news of the twins' whereabouts, because she had apparently met them, which should be impossible because when the Abyss twin arrived at the spaceship where their traveler twin was, they were still sleeping within the hibernation chamber. They never left. So how did the traveler meet Deirdre if they had never left the ship? It's a bit of a paradox, one that's made worse by the fact that depending on how you respond to the Abyss twin at the end of the quest, you can end up in a situation where there are 3 keys to the hibernation chamber, which should also be impossible unless time travel is involved, since there were only ever 2 keys in existence, 1 for each twin.
But we found a duplication
glitch
glitch
as the result of a bootstrap paradox, which means that it has no defined origin and therefore should not exist, but does. Which certainly makes it seem like time travel is what's happening here. Except,
dude, is duplication glitches in video games kind of like a bootstrap paradox? Because like in the game, you're perceiving time as going from, you know, like I said, in the game characters are like a linear line, A to B. But once you save the game and then load it again, it's kind of like a weird type of time paradox that you're throwing the characters of the game into, you know what I mean? And that's how a lot of duplication glitches will work. You like drop something, save while it's dropping, load the old game or some shit like that, and then all of a sudden now you got 3 of the same item. You know what I mean? Ooh, hold on a minute.
there's a problem with using time travel as a solution.
Isn't it weird too how like time travel is all about your perspective? Time travel is all about perspective, and then when you look at like a story, you can write the time travel into the story, and you're looking at it from an outside perspective so it can make sense to you, but those characters in the story could be really confused how A and B could happen. So that's how we really have to look at anything that revolves around time travel, is we have to step outside of the book and act as the writer. We have to act as Alice, you know? And we have to look at it like, if I was writing this book, how could this make sense? We can't act as the characters.
Origin and therefore should not exist.
Use your noodles.
Which certainly makes it seem like time travel is what's happening here. Except there's a problem with using time travel as a solution here. Well, 2 problems. First off, this Deirdre is not from Conria. She's a character from the book that contains New Conria. So this can't be the Deirdre that met the future traveler and the past Abyss twin, at least not according to the laws of causality that we laid out earlier. And second, while it can be argued that we are all time travelers moving in the direction of time's arrow, our experience in Nod Cry heavily suggests that the arrow of time cannot point backwards, so the present cannot move towards the past. However, people in the present can witness the events of the past. They just can't interact with or change the past in any meaningful way because that would break the laws of causality.
Let me
show you what I mean. In the 6.2 Archon quest, we encounter a bunch of phantoms, memories from thousands of years ago that manifested into a form that we can perceive in the present. And these phantoms are basically replaying events from the past on an endless loop. Kinda like Sumeru's Dream Samsara and kind of like Simulanka's Clockwork Time Rewind. You can think of this as like the past and present existing in 2 separate but adjacent rooms within a building. No one in the past room can go to the present room, and no one from the present room can go to the past room because there's a wall in the way. But people in the room of the past can talk to the people in the room of the present. Sound, or rather information, can pass through the space-time barrier, which is the wall.
Oh, did she draw this?
We're yelling at each other through the wall. Now, this is where I think it's really easy for people to get tripped up.
That was like a partial face reveal, but it was just a hand reveal. Is that the first Ashikai hand reveal? Holy shit, wait a minute, she's coming out of her bubble. Hold.
Because Durin is able to use the power of the Abyss to interact directly with some of the events of the past, although he cannot physically travel there himself. I'll talk more about why this matters in a bit, but do...
And cool thing about this too is there were certain areas where we could interact and then others where we couldn't. Like, it's weird that he saw us, Durin, using his abyssal powers to change the direction, right? And then all of a sudden, he's sitting down around the campfire with us having a full-blown conversation. I forget exactly in the story what triggered that. Or like why he couldn't interact with us a lot initially, but then was able to sit down and have a full conversation. Maybe she'll revisit that, because I forget what triggered him to be able to do that.
Through the wall. Now, this is where I think it's really easy for people to get tripped up, because Durin is able to use the power of the Abyss to interact directly with some of the events of the past, although he cannot physically travel there himself. I'll talk more about why this matters in a bit, but do note that no matter the level of interaction, no one, not even Durin, was able to change the past permanently.
Right.
Those segments of time that Durin messed with continuously reset themselves, and the ultimate fates or future of those people from the past remained unchanged, just like in Similanka. Alice even confirms this to be the case at the end of the quest. But what's the point of being able to pass information or temporarily alter something in the past if you can't actually do anything with it?
Variables.
But that's just it. You can. While it is true that all moments within a block of time are fixed in place and cannot be changed, who said that time is limited to a single block? Because it's not. And we know it's not because both Anders' daughter and Wanderer added a new block of time onto Teyvat's existing block of time in Durin's story quest. That's how they were able to change fate. And I think I know exactly how this works.
Here we go.
In order for me to explain how to change an unchangeable block of time, we're gonna need to recontextualize
I did the same thing.
question.
I did the same thing.
And that starts by changing the phrase block time into book time.
Oh, we
See,
all did,
Teyvat
'cause we had
is
to
a
break
book,
it.
or at least it functions like a book. Now, I'm aware I've pitched similar theories before, but I think it bears revisiting in light of new information. And also in light of Hoyo making a planet book already with Amphorius. If you've played Star Rail, then you know what I'm talking about. If you didn't play it, then don't worry about it. It's just precedent. It's
just
not like
look, honestly, bro, if you want to save yourself some sanity and you're a story player, nah, you know what? I can't even say that. You should play Star Rail. That shit was great. I'm not gonna lie. That was one of the best 3.0. There's one of the best stories. Real shit. That is a really good story. It's long, but it is a good story, man. If that was like a standalone game, if 3.0 of Honkai Star Rail was a standalone game, that shit would have been like Game of the Year. Like, that shit would have cleared Expedition 33. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, you're talking 50 hours of story, pretty much. But that was a hell of a story. 3.0 Amphorius would have won Game of the Year as a standalone game. It is what it is. I wish they could do that. I wish they could enter. You know what I mean? I wish their individual patches could, like, enter the competition, but they can't. That's not how it works.
Come up again or anything. Now, as far as our current understanding of the lore goes, Nibelung was born alongside the world of Teyvat and is generally regarded as its original creator deity. But if the world functions like a book, then the creator of the world should be like the author of a book. Which means that Nibelung is the author of the book world of Teyvat. And this fits right in line with Nibelung's main power appearing to be that of Logos.
Damn! Is this what Nibelung looked like, for real? Is this his face reveal? Jesus, dude. He's a child of a Nosferatu? Oh my god. I think it, hey look, I think it could work. I think it could work. Pull that shit off.
Or language, sometimes referred to as will or reason.
I spent 30 minutes on this monstrosity.
I have a whole video on how language creation dragon magic might work that you can watch if you want more information, but all you really need to know is that the dragon god author Nibelung used the power of language to write his little world into existence the same way the biblical god used the power of word or logos to create the universe. There, I saved you 40 minutes.
Thank you.
I think we're being told explicitly this in Durin's story quest when Anders' daughter says that the first magic of the world was called storytelling, also known as the magic of fate. More on this in a minute. Now, a book is the perfect metaphor for block time because all of the events within a book's story exist all at once, but they'll only make sense when you read them in a very specific order. In fact, the process of reading could be likened to the perception of time passing, since you read linearly and time seems to pass linearly. And that means that the pages of the book that are being held firmly in place by the book's bindings could represent the law of causality, aka cause and effect. Now, while you can read the contents of a book out of order, it doesn't actually change the order of the pages or the order of the events within those pages. It only changes your perception and understanding of the book's contents. The beginning of the book always precedes the end, even if you try to read the book backwards. Now, you remember how we were rewinding time in Simulanka? That's no different than rereading the paragraph of a page over and over and over again. The events themselves don't change, but our understanding of the events could change, like they did in this particular instance in Simulanka. We changed nothing, but we understood more by rewinding time in this particular instance. Now, all that said, books don't always exist in such a fixed state. When books are being written, their pages and events within them are malleable, and they stay that way until a book is published. Because it's only once a book is published that its contents can no longer be changed. You can still do minor editing, like scribbling out a few choice words or names from any given copy. Heck, I'd even argue that the power of the abyss that Durin was using to interact with the past was a bit like using black ink to blot out words, but, you know, the story still isn't changing. At least, not in any meaningful way. And I say that because we've kind of seen stuff like this before. Remember that Wanderer also couldn't change the past by blotting out his name. He could only stop people from remembering that he was a part of those events. But he was still there. Nothing
Yeah, so it'd be like if you went back through and literally blotted out every time that his name was mentioned associated with a said event. You'd read the book. It's almost, they do that in the game, actually. They blank out words. And you're like, oh, I don't know who the hell that could be. Yeah, you could throw a name in there, but, you know. But in a book, if you were to read it, everything that Scar did, you were to block his name out, you wouldn't know that it was him. He would just show up later with the random name and be like, oh, I know all these events happened, but your name wasn't associated with any of them, so, wasn't you, obviously. I wouldn't even suspect you. I wouldn't even think that was you. I don't even know who you are. Makes sense.
Really changed. So, okay, block time is book time. Moments within block time are like events that happen within the pages of a book. Your perception of time within block time is like a reader reading the pages of the book. You can't change the events themselves, but you can change your understanding of them.
I forgot if she explained block time before, but I just want to take a second to say that explanation is a very good explanation. Block time is book time. That's probably the, explain it like I'm 5 version. Like, that was a very good explanation.
Same way, we can now revisit our original question with new context. Instead of asking ourselves, how do we change an unchangeable past, we can instead ask, how do you change the story of a published book? Well, I kind of already told you the answer earlier when I said you can add a block of time to an existing block of time to change it. So if we just translate that into like book speak, then you can probably change the story of a published book by writing a prequel. Sequel. Now the solution is both simpler.
Hey, could you change? You probably could, because a prequel would also work. Because if you knew that if you knew prior context to the current book, you may know certain things are going to happen and or like not happen at the end of the book, or certain ideas that you're left on a cliffhanger for the initial book could be explained just explained by writing a prequel. Or if you're like reading a book on deception or people are deceptive in it, you could figure out if people are lying in the initial book by writing a prequel, potentially. Prequels work too.
And far more complex than it first sounds. So let's check in with Wanderer again so he can show us how it works. In Durin's story quest, we found Wanderer at the Academia Library arguing with the librarian. He was frustrated that Volume 5 of an unknown to us series was inaccurate and incomplete, so he wanted to replace that Volume 5 with a newly corrected version that he wrote instead. But he couldn't replace the original Volume 5 with his version because that would require removing the original Volume 5 from the library, which he cannot do because it's not available for loan. So if he can't check out the original Volume 5, then he can't replace it with the new version of Volume 5. This is, of course, an abstracted example of being unable to change the past. because the past is what's already been published, and you cannot change the contents of what's been published already. And Wanderer tells us exactly why this is the case. It's because two versions of the same story cannot exist at the same time. It's against Tevat's rules. And in Tevat, people's individual stories are their fate. So the same logic applies to anyone who is sharing a fate like Big Durin and Mini Durin. If one fate already exists, the other cannot exist. There can only be one canonical story. And if for some reason two fates or two versions of the same story exist at once, the older or original one will overwrite the newer one. This is why Mini Durin was being forgotten. The fate of the original Durin was trying to overwrite his existence as per the rules. And I don't know why, but like in my head, I just picture this scenario as like Mini Durin on one side and Big Durin on the other, and like an old spaghetti western, and they're just going, "This town ain't big enough for the two of us." But then the whole thing ends with a hug instead of a shootout. Sorry, I got distracted.
No, she could voice act. That was crazy. That was actually really good.
So the situation with the whole Volume 5 thing seemed to be impossible and unresolvable. Until Wanderer took a quick trip into Andersdottir's book and discovered the witch's loophole. While it is true that you cannot return a book that you've never checked out or replace an already published story with a new version, you can create a sequel that extends, embellishes, or changes the meanings of the previous volume's story without actually changing any of the contents of the previous volumes. Just imagine if you were reading a murder mystery book and at the end of the book, the detective caught the murderer and then got them arrested. That's a pretty satisfying and complete ending to the story, right? But now imagine that a couple years later, that murder mystery book got a sequel, and in the very first chapter, it was revealed that the detective from the first book accused the wrong person, and the real murderer is still out there somewhere.
Oh no!
That would completely recontextualize the story of the first book without actually changing anything about it, now wouldn't it?
Yes,
that is the fate-changing trick the Hexencircle uncovered. Wanderer figured it out. And that is precisely why he ended up submitting his version of the book to the library, not as a replacement for Volume 5, but as
Volume 6.
Because Volume 6 was planned to be released, but it was not yet written. So there was space available for it. That means that submitting Wanderer's book as Volume 6 would not violate any rules. The sequel allowed Wanderer to make the corrections needed to the series and add in all those missing pages that he found. And it also came with the added benefit of him becoming the new author of the series. That changing of the author bit will be important for later, but for now, let's use what we've learned to solve one of our time travel conundrums, the paradoxes found in the space.
See, and it kind of confirms that the Hexencircle are the ones writing, or at least Alice is the one with that power over the entirety of Tevat, because it's like, you could argue that, okay, if he could just write an extra chapter about himself, why can't anybody do it? Well, they had to use Alice's magic pen, right? That's the only way this was all able to work, is by her magic pen. Who's to say that, oh, little Timmy's dying, you know? Why can't he just, hey, hold on, I don't want to die. Hold on, wait, I don't want to die right here. I don't want my town to be burned down and for me to die. So hold on, hey, invader, can you grab me a piece of paper and a pen? I gotta write a new chapter. Let me write this shit down real quick. I do not die. I continue living. Oh, I am also rich and become a millionaire, and I kill all the invaders. The end. Well, nobody can do that, obviously. The only way this is able to work is through Alice's magic pen. Therefore, she must have the divine power to change, well, add on to the story. You know, she has the outside perspective of the Book of Tevat to be able to add onto it. The people in the story can't actually write their own endings. No, that's not how it works. You need the outside power, the divine power. And we're going to act like anyone inside the book has the power to outmaneuver the writer of the book. Come on, brother. That is not possible. Alice is letting Dottore away for a reason. Look, it'll come back to it. Hold, she's gonna get to it. I know it.
And time for you, quest. The three main mysteries of that quest are as follows.
Wait on it.
1. How did Deirdre meet the Traveler? And tell the Abyss Twin about it 500 years ago when Deirdre is from New Conria, not the original Conria, and when the Traveler was still sleeping in the hibernation chamber. And 2. Why are there 3 hibernation chamber keys when there should only be 2? And the third question I haven't actually posed to you guys yet, why does the Abyss Twin need the power of a world, in this case New Conria, in order to challenge the heavenly principles? Well, let's answer that third question first. If the goal of the Abyss Twin is to challenge the god of the world, and the god of the world is also the author of the world, then to stand on equal footing, the Abyss Twin needed to become an author of a world as well. Hence why New Conria is a book. And that ties into the answers of the first and second question. See, the perceived time travel here should merely be the result of the Abyss Twin successfully adding their Book of Conria to the Book of Tevat, thus creating a series. They're doing the same thing Wanderer did and adding Conria to the story of the world at the end, so it's like correcting it retroactively. And this is where things get a little bit trippy because the Deirdre that we met both already existed and does not yet exist because the point of the story the Traveler is in exists in the time before New Conria is attached to the story of Tevat, but the events contained within New Conria will happen 500 years ago. New Conria is a prequel, kind of. Alternatively, you can argue that Conria did already exist, but the Abyss Twin was pulling like a wall.
Oh, we're gonna rewind that real quick. See, this is where, in my opinion, fuck the cinematics right here. Show me a graph, okay? Because not just draw it. We're about to paint.exe and draw that bad boy. Hold on, let's hear all that through again.
Wanderer Book of Tevat. And second question. See, the perceived time travel here should merely be the result of the Abyss Twin successfully adding their Book of Conria to the Book of Tevat, thus creating a series.
Right.
They're doing the same thing Wanderer did and adding Conria to the story of the world at the end, so it's like correcting it retroactively. And this is where things get a little bit trippy because the Deirdre that we met both already existed and does not yet exist because the point of the story the Traveler is in exists in the time before New Conria is attached to the story of Tevat, but the events contained within New Conria will happen 500 years ago. New Conria is a prequel. Kind of. Alternatively, you can argue that Conria did already exist, but the Abyss Twin was pulling like a Wanderer and was writing their own sequel to correct or alter the original story by filling in the blanks. The idea works either way and is probably the reason why the Conrian chapter isn't...
Hey, look, I take that as that. I don't know if she's trying to say that New Conria is actually regular Conria or what, but I think New Conria as a sequel seems a little bit better.
Numbered in the Travail trailer. It's not really a chapter, it's a volume. Also, this kind of implies that all of the Looms of Fate that we've seen so far, or all the things that resemble Looms of Fate, are actually meant to just be books, or book worlds. And that's why they kind of look like hive minds, because they kind of like have to, suck characters into the book. Now, technically, I didn't resolve all of the second question. The part about how we got 3 hibernation chamber keys.
That's in another video.
Because I don't really have a definitive answer for it. And I think that might be the point. See, at the end of Inversion of Genesis, Nicole talked about how it didn't matter what broke the jar, only that the jar broke. It could be a cat that broke it, or a bird. It didn't really matter. We could fill in the blanks for who broke the jar ourselves without breaking the laws of cause and effect. And so long as we do not violate the laws of cause...
See, that, dude, that's crazy that they did kind of hint at it then. Holy shit, because those are like the variables, But it's like, in this case, it really doesn't matter. No matter what did it, you're really not going to learn anything. Other than if you didn't know any animals existed. You know what I mean? You could change what thing, knock it over, and then all of a sudden learn of a new animal, maybe, right? I don't even know what I'm saying. But that kind of makes sense. But the fact that here that, like, so many variables exist in... like the existing story of Nod Cry that the Tori was able to change, and they hinted at the whole variable thing here. It's not a cat or a bird.
Causality, then anything goes, really, unfortunately. So I think Hoyo might actually be going kind of meta on this one for the keys, and they might leave that closed causal loop completely unresolved and unexplained, because so long as the effects of those keys take place and a cause exists, then the details behind the cause may not actually matter that much. Did we keep the key or give it back to Deirdre? It doesn't matter so long as Deirdre somehow gets the key and leaves it for us to find. The key could be a copy, it could be from another draft of the story that somehow made it into the final publication, or it could have come from outside the story entirely. It doesn't matter. So long as a plot is able to resolve itself, the readers of a story can fill in the blanks with whatever solution they like. And if this is the case, then it's actually a pretty good example of why the sequel method of retroactive time adjustments works. Because all stories come with a lot of blank spaces in them. That is to say, there exists no book where the author described or explained everything perfectly and in total detail, with no room for embellishment or interpretation.
Variables.
Any book containing that level of detail would not only be impossibly long, but it would be tedious to read. So authors just don't do that. Many parts of the story are just implied. Authors tend to just tell the readers the most important things they need to know about, and then rely on the reader's imagination to fill in the blanks for them.
It's like when you ask yourself, oh, if I do this, is this actually going to impact the outcome of my life? When it really doesn't matter. Like, oh, if I miss the highway exit this day, does that really matter? No. You know, you added 5 minutes, sure, but you still get to work. Doesn't really matter. You still got to work. But none of it actually, it doesn't matter how you got there, and all that matters is that you got there.
A sequel that can successfully change parts of the original story does so by taking advantage of these blank spaces and turning them into something new. If this concept sounds kind of familiar, it's probably because Alhaitham was the one who first brought it up during his teaser trailer when he was talking about the space between words holding more meaning than the words themselves. These blank spaces are undefined variables that you can leverage to do something with, and that's what I think both Columbina and Dottore are doing in Act 6 of the Notcry Archon quest. Now, Columbina's situation is the more complex of the two, so let's start with Dottore. So after Dottore attempts to seize the power of the three moons, Alice provides some insight into his movements. Now you remember those phantoms of the past that we saw earlier, right? Well, if we use our book metaphor, then those phantoms would be from an earlier page in the book that somehow folded over itself until it was close enough to touch the present page of the book. This allowed the past and the present to see each other, or rather, to read the contents of each other's pages. This informational exchange is the shouting through the wall bit that I mentioned earlier. Now, Alice says that these exchanges create variables, and those variables can be stacked in such a way that they can change the story. I'm actually really annoyed that the game is using the term variables for this because it means I have to use a more digitized metaphor to explain things, but here we go. You remember what I said about the arrow of time being able to move only in a single direction, and that direction was set by memory, which is the past, and volition, which is the future, or like the process of making the future? Well, time's arrow also has to obey the law of causality, which states that the past, cause, determines the future, effect. But what's in between those 2 points? It's the present, which is represented by choice or will. Now, causality turns the past, cause, into the data set that the present uses to make a choice that will determine the shape of the future, effect. Given that the contents of the dataset never changes, the choices made will always be the same, so the future result will also be unchanging. This is what we call predetermination, or, if you'd rather, the illusion of choice, or a world where you possess no free will. A good in-game example of this is when the Academia used the Akasha system to perfectly predict Cyno's movements based on a detailed record of his past actions. It was only when Cyno encountered an unaccounted-for variable in the desert that the predictive model failed. Now, a variable in this case can be anything that is not clearly defined, and thus it varies. It's what we call uncertainty or blank spaces, as I mentioned earlier, and it's these opportunities where the author did not denote something absolutely that provides space for changes within the story. So Dottore basically located those blank spaces and inserted a prophecy that described a savior who would create a new moon and revive the moon goddess. This prophecy rippled through the past, which created the perfect opportunity in the present for Dottore to fulfill said prophecy. For a limited time, anyway. Because like we saw with Durin, any changes made to the past are temporary. The laws of causality will correct themselves. But I'm pretty sure this short-term offer was the only method available to him because Dottore is not a descender, although he was definitely trying to become one by stealing the moon marrows. Confused? Don't be. There's a very important connection between the power of the moons and the significance of the descenders. And obviously, Dottore's motives of not being controlled by the world, by the story, and breaking free of fate of his own volition. And we can figure out exactly what the connection between the moons and the Descenders are by going back to Durin's story quest. I'm not going to recap the entirety of Durin's story quest, but here's basically what you need to know.
So the thing is it's like, once he's able to change so many variables and appear in the present to change what seems like what's actually going to happen for the foreseeable future, is we can predict that this was supposed to happen, or something will eventually correct itself if it's supposed to correct itself based on fate or the ending of the book, right? So while it may seem like Dottoro's winning now, we can assume that in the future, Dottori won't win if that's what happens at the end of the book, right? But it has to appear that, or it could appear that Dottori is winning right now. It may have already been written like that. Or he did, change enough to let all of this go through. And for the outcome of the book to actually be what the outcome of the book is. I think that's just what we have to figure out. But I still say that, this was all kind of paradoxical anyways, where Dottori had to win right now in order to send Columbina back in time to set certain things in motion for them to win. Without Columbina going back in time, do we get to where we currently are in the game? No. So in order for her to go back in time, Dottori had to win. So it's like, did he actually achieve anything, or was this always supposed to happen? In a way, it was probably always supposed to happen. We're the variable that's coming down that will actually change something, because we're a descender. What that's going to be exactly, not sure. Well, let's back this up a second, just to rehear exactly what she said at the end of this.
A very important connection between the power of the moons and the significance of the Descenders. And obviously, Dottori's motives of not being controlled by the world, by the story, and breaking free of fate of his own volition. And we can figure out exactly what the connection between the moons and the Descenders are by going back to Durin's story quest. I'm not going to recap the entirety of Durin's story quest, but here's basically what you need to know. The first Durin was an abyssal creation of Rhine-Daughter, responsible for nearly destroying Mondstadt during the Conrian Cataclysm 500 years ago. Fortunately for Mondstadt, Durin lost a battle to the death against Dvalin on Dragonspine. But like all three of Rhine-Daughter's known abyssal dragon creations, Durin didn't truly die at this point, but instead fell into a temporary hibernation state, slowly regaining his strength for a prophesized rebirth. But one member of the Hexenzirkel, Anya Marie Andersdottir, had a rather peculiar wish. She wanted nothing more than for Durin to have a happier ending, not a lonely, tragic one full of death and destruction. So she decided to attempt the impossible and tried to change his fate. With the help of Alice and Barbeloth, Anya managed to create the storybook world of Simulanka, which was based on Teyvat, and she made its main character a little dragon named Durin, so that his fate would be linked to the other Durin in Teyvat. Because remember, within Teyvat, a name is also a role within a story, and those who are cast in the same role will inevitably share the same fate.
Shades, moons, sinners. Life, death, space, time, reason. How are they all able to share?
Because their stories are supposed to be the same. As a quick side note, I recently learned that the whole name is fate idea actually has its roots in science. There have been several studies that conclude we actually grow into our names, meaning the name that we're given shapes how we look. This is connected to the idea that when you tell someone your name, they might respond with, "Oh, yeah, you definitely look like an insert name here." And some scientists summarize this phenomenon by calling a name a self-fulfilling prophecy. Just thought that was kind of neat given what's happening with Durin. So Anya believed that if she could successfully link the fate of both...
That's fucking cap. I don't know who put that out there, but look, it's like one of those selective bias things, okay? Like you see one person and it looks like that. Oh, you could meet a whole bunch of other people that look... You're gonna tell me all Johns in the world look the same, brother? No. No, they do not. No, they do not. I could look up 3 Johns right now. One's butt-ass ugly. Another one's like a supermodel. Okay? Ain't no way. But you go through life, you meet 1 John. Okay, that's your initial John. That's your initial one, right? Okay, now you meet another 3. They don't look like that initial John. You don't say, hey, you look like a John. But you meet that 4th John, and that 4th John, you're like, oh, wait, that looks like a previous John I met. Hey, you kind of look like a John. But what about those other 3? Those other 3 didn't matter because you didn't make a connection with the previous John. Fake science, pseudoscience, bullshit. I don't know who published that paper, but I just debunked it in 3 seconds.
Durins together, she could overwrite the tragic story with a happier one. But linking the fates of the Durins together meant that this new Durin, so Mini Durin, was destined to become a dangerous fell dragon as well, just like the original Durin. So Anya made sure to raise Mini Durin carefully. She taught him right from wrong with her stories and made sure that no matter how dangerous of a dragon he became, his heart would always remain honest and caring. And as long as he was able to stay pure of heart, he would one day meet a group of friends who would help him overcome his dangerous nature, because that was a part of the story that Anya had written for him. But this was just the prologue to her plan. In order for the fates of the 2 dragons to actually be linked properly, Mini Durin would have to leave the storybook and enter Teyvat. But remember, the rules of Teyvat say that you cannot have 2 versions of the same story existing at the same time.
No.
And because you cannot change the events of the past, Mini Durin would need to become the future of the original Durin. If we compare this scenario to what Wanderer did earlier, then original Durin would be Volume 5 of the Durin series, while Mini Durin would be Volume 6. Now, the game frequently refers to...
Which, you might bring it up, but actually, if you play through the chapters in Durin Story Quest, they also go... Chapter 5, and then the final chapter we write is actually Chapter 6.
This process as grafting, and it's a pretty good analogy, but if you don't really understand how grafting works in practice, then I think the nuance gets a little bit lost. So, as a former farm kid, let me explain this process using apple trees. Let's say you wanted to plant an apple tree that grew Granny Smith apples. Well, you can't actually plant a Granny Smith apple seed to get that Granny Smith apple tree. And that's because apple trees don't grow true to type. So a Granny Smith apple seed does not produce a Granny Smith apple tree. It just produces an apple tree that produces a random or new kind of apple.
Wait, no way that's true. Really? How does that work? Wait a minute. There's no way that that's real. There's no way. I mean, what? Because it's a clone of the parent, not a recombination? Like, you aren't clones of your parents? Oh, but they're that, like, similar to each other? But you are, like, I'm sorry, but, like, you're the same race as your parents. It's not as though 2 white people can make a black baby. Right? Like, how does that make sense? Basically, the types of apples are like races, right? I guess not. I guess not. I guess I'm wrong. What the hell? That's actually crazy. That's... what?
So if you want a tree that produces Granny Smith apples, you're going to need to take a branch from an existing Granny Smith apple tree and then attach it to the rootstock of another apple tree. The branch we took from the Granny Smith apple tree is called the scion wood, and it's generally the youngest shoot of an existing tree. So we can kind of think of this as the tree's future. The rootstock represents the oldest part of the tree because it's the roots of the tree, so it can represent the past. Once you graft that branch of scion wood into the rootstock, whatever apples that rootstock would have produced no longer matters because the grafted scion wood ensures that Granny Smith apples will be produced instead because that's what kind of tree that branch came from. If you consider the rootstock to be the original tree that you were working with and the tree that you wanted to change the fate of because you wanted Granny Smith apples and not whatever kind of apple it was.
So if the tree was originally producing Macintosh apples and then I just plugged in fucking Granny Smith roots, the roots, like, it just changes, like, it just alters into Granny Smith apples all of a sudden? Nah, bro, what the fuck are we talking about? That doesn't even make sense. Like, if somebody told me this and we're like, yeah, bro, that's how it works, I'd be like, you're fucking lying, go home. No, that's not how this works. That's crazy. Like, is that not crazy? What? I mean, a simple experiment proves it, but goddamn, that just sounds not true. It just sounds not true. Like, you just hear things that just sound not true, and this is one of them.
Going to produce? Then grafting the Granny Smith apple branch onto the rootstock literally changes the future of this rootstock, of this original tree, because it introduces new variables.
Well, to be fair, I guess what else would happen, right? What else? I would just honestly assume that it just wouldn't mix and it would die. That would be my assumption. Because, okay, you have one that's producing one type, it's going into another type, they don't mix, dead. Like blood, right? You have your certain type of blood, you put another type of blood in it, you don't work, you die, you lose your arm, what the fuck ever happens, right? Like that. But no, this thing just says, nope, we're changing.
From an entirely different tree. If we apply this analogy to our Durins, then mini Durin is the scion wood from the Granny Smith apple tree, while original Durin is the rootstock. Now, did we change the rootstock in order to change what kind of fruit that tree could grow? Not at all. We just grafted a new future onto it, which retroactively changes what kind of tree that rootstock is.
Wait, does this actually change how I look at what Herta was talking about with the tree? Remember Herta talking to Cyrene about the tree? Does that actually... Like, I didn't know this was a thing, so this analogy is huge, right? In understanding certain things. Now I wonder if I could understand Herta's explanation to Cyrene a little bit differently with this new acquired knowledge about apple trees. Wow. Farmers take the W.
It could have previously been a crabapple rootstock, but now it's a Granny Smith rootstock because this is a tree that now grows Granny Smith apples. The tree now has a new, previously impossible to achieve fate. Because this is something that would never happen naturally if you just left that rootstock to its own devices. It wouldn't happen. But the Durins aren't really the only example of this happening in game. In fact, this idea of trying to graft on new futures to achieve a previously impossible fate might actually be the reason why so many Archons have a twin or a doppelganger. Having two of you can create new variables. I mean, just compare Durin's situation to Focalor and Farina's. Or if you want more plant-based metaphors, Rukkhadevata literally fashioned Nahida out of Irminsul's scion wood. Nahida became Rukkhadevata's future. Now, in order for grafting to be successful, you have to connect the scion wood and the rootstock in the correct way. And for the Durins, this meant taking advantage of the prophecy of rebirth.
Well, and like somebody has to have the power to do it. Like, you need that person to plant a scion wood in the root tree. It wouldn't happen naturally. So I'm assuming that the power to take Durin as the scion wood into the root tree is somebody like Alice's magical pen in this case, who's basically tying those two onto each other. Because without that, nobody's there to basically tie them together. Right? Like, because it can't happen naturally.
That would be the perfect time to replace the original Durin story with the new Durin story. The problem was that this appointed time wouldn't happen until long after Anya was dead. And this is problematic because Mini Durin is a storybook character, and the only thing keeping him alive and keeping his story going is Anya, the author. So if she dies, there's no author to continue Durin's story, which means his story just stops and he's not able to graft himself onto the original Durin's story. For that reason, Anya needed the story to keep going even after she died. So Alice helped her imbue a magic pen with all of Anya's words, so that the pen could continue writing Durin's story until the grafting process was complete. Now here's the other thing about grafting. It's not an instant process.
Right.
When the scion wood and the rootstock are put together, they're actually taped together. This is like a temporary bond that holds the two pieces of wood together until the fibers of the wood fuse and grow into each other. So even though it looks like Albedo successfully fused the soul of Mini Durin and Big Durin together, he actually didn't. He just stuck the scion wood in the rootstock, and Anya's pen was acting as the binding tape that was holding those pieces of wood together.
Okay.
And this is where we ran into the next big problem, which was that the pen was running out of words and thus running out of ink. If the pen stopped writing, it would be like the tape bindings
What did that say?
out of words and thus running out of ink.
I'm so normal about her? The fuck does that mean? What the hell does that mean?
If the pen stopped writing, it would be like the tape bindings of a graft failing. The scion wood, or the future Mini Durin, would fall off the rootstock, original Durin, and only the rootstock would be able to continue to grow. This is why everyone started to forget Mini Durin. The only way Mini Durin could ensure that his story remained attached to the story of original Durin was to finalize the grafting process. So he needed to step into his mother's shoes and become the author of his own story. That way, there would be no need for the temporary bindings of the magic pen. Now, none of this sounds like it has his mother's shoes. The way Mini Durin could ensure that his story remained attached to the story of original Durin was to finalize the grafting process. So he needed to step into his mother's shoes and become the author of his own story. That way, there would be no need for the temporary bindings of the magic pen.
He took
now,
the pen.
none of this sounds like it has anything to do with Descenders or the Moons or Dottore, but it does. Because see, there was a new perspective in a story existing if there's no one there to read it, just as there's no point in time existing if there's no one there to witness it or perceive it. And this is why, in order for Durin to become an author, he needed to be accompanied by a reader. Alice's magic, which made all of this possible, could not work without both a writer and a reader present. And of course, that reader is the Traveler in this case, and the Traveler is a Descender, which is also sometimes called a witness.
Remember, Alice did say she may have had to have been the one to step in.
And this made me realize that I wasn't just imagining things. Durin is actually supposed to be an allegory for Nibelung, which would make Wanderer an allegory for Voyager, but we should probably talk about that another time. Like, think about it for a second. We have two dragons with power over the abyss, both born alongside their respective worlds and both ultimately becoming the author of their own story. There's obviously more connections between them, but you see this? This shape here? It is literally Amphoreus, the book world planet from Honkai Star Rail. I swear to God, Hoyoverse has one idea and one idea only. They're just really good at remixing it over and over and over again in 1,000 different ways. So
while partially true, you can't say we're all not hooked like a bunch of fiends, okay? We're all hooked like a bunch of goddamn fentanyl addicts.
Don't know it's that one idea until it's too late. You're already sucked in. I'd love to say that this is just like a one-time coincidence that they've just done this once for Genshin and once for Star Rail, but this is actually like at least the third time over the course of 3 separate games. I bet you I can find more if I go looking for them, but I don't really want to, so I'm not going to. But I digress. If Durin had a Descender acting as his reader, then we could assume that Nibelung also had a Descender as his reader as well. And I think it was the first Descender, the Heavenly Principles. Hear me out on this. When an author finishes a book, especially once it's been published, they technically surrender ownership of the story. I'm not talking about copyright or IP ownership, I'm talking about the loss of control over the story's meaning. Because whoever reads the book is free to interpret, embellish, and fantasize about its contents however they like, and there's quite literally nothing the author can do to prevent it. In fact, one might argue that it is the reader that determines the true meaning behind an author's story, not the author, even though they're the ones that made it. Roland Barthes wrote about this in his essay titled The Death of the Author. I feel like everyone has heard this phrase at least once, probably in the wrong context, but I feel like few have actually read the essay, so there's a link to it in the description if you want it. But for those of you who won't read it, here's the part I'd like you to chew on. Barthes argues that no one can ascertain the true intention of the author, and thus the meaning of any text belongs only to the reader. For the true power hidden within writing...
I mean, it's true. You ever remember English class? Think back to like 10th grade, 11th grade English for a second, all right? You're in your classroom, sitting down, whole class is reading the book. Kid raises his hand. Miss Sosa? Yes, Jerry? What do you think, or what really happened at the end of the book? Why don't we know what happened to Buddy? He just kind of left. He just left the scene, and we never heard from him again. Well, what do you think happened to him, Jerry? Well, I don't know. Maybe he died. And the teacher's just like, yeah, maybe he did. Maybe he lived a long life. Who knows? Who knows, Jerry? That's up to you. English teachers were onto something.
Is actually reading. And this is why I think Descenders have wills that rival that of a world. They are the ones who determine meaning from the story. They represent that future that the author has no control over. Ergo, as the author, Nibelung's death was inevitable. The author dies when the reader picks up their work. That's the moment a story stops being a mess of drafted possibilities and steps into the realm of publication, the past. And right now, the Heavenly Principles is the reader of the world, the one who ascribes meaning to the words, and perhaps the one who, pulled a wanderer and declared themselves to be the new author of an existing series by writing an unauthorized sequel.
Yeah,
but do note that not all readers become authors, although they all seem to have the ability to do so. Just take a look at the second and third Descenders. They don't seem to have written much of anything. Well, nothing that we know of, anyway. It's a bit hard to tell with Tevat's kind of murky, semi-revisionist history. And there was this one side quest in Similanka where there were like these 3 main families who all thought that they had the true origin story of, you know, the town. Like their family was the one that was responsible for driving out the big evil dragon in the past, only to find out that all 3 versions of their history were true. And the only reason that happened is because when Anya was writing the story, she wrote 3 different drafts and didn't know which one she liked the most. And then her cat kind of smushed all the drafts together and she was like, huh, I could make all 3 of them canon at the same time. I think I'll do that. And I think about that a lot when we have 3 Descenders. Like, is it possible that 3 versions of history have meshed together and we just don't have the knowledge to decipher the evidence? But the most recent reader of the Tevat story is the Traveler, and as the reader, their real power lies in their ability to witness, to read, and to interpret, and to remember the story of Tevat as it was written. And by sheer virtue of the nature of their existence, they are an unaccounted for variable, because no author can control the reader. And should this reader decide to pick up a pen for themselves, they will essentially become an author, wielding the power of Logos to write a new chapter in the story. Which is really interesting to me because the power of Logos is usually depicted as being gold, while the power of the Abyss is generally depicted as purple. Something you'll notice is that when Anya's pen is writing Durin's story, the ink is purple. But when Durin takes it over, it turns gold. And I've mentioned this before, again, I made a whole video on this, but I really do think that we should think of the Abyss as if it were ink. Black ink, raw ink, full of possibilities. And if it is ink, then essentially the Traveler's ability to absorb infinite amounts of abyssal energy is like them amassing the potential to write whatever they want to convert that violet ink into golden words. I don't know, I've just been kind of stuck on that thought for a long time. And while I'm writing this tangent in the margins,
I didn't notice that with the whole pen writing thing. That's interesting. Because think about it, if we weren't there as a Descender either, like we're so far from out, like we're technically supposed to be outside of the story. Like as a Descender, we aren't part of the story. That's why we're not in Irminsul. So realistically, in the story of Tevat, if you just look at it as a book, these people who were absorbing abyssal power from, she ended up dying, like the aunt ended up dying anyways, right? But we absorbed her abyssal power to let them, I believe, party a little bit longer, if I remember that story correctly. She still ended up dying. But without us there, she dies there, can't party. So her fate remained the same, but we gave her and everybody else a different memory of how she went out, which is like good overall. I guess you could just say that that's good for morale. Like you're happy that you got to spend final moments with somebody in a happy state, you know, which could change. Like you could have gone through a whole depressive state as a person because you didn't get to party with that person going out. But us changing that and allowing her to live a little bit longer allows that person to, you know, not go into that depressive state, which could actually change certain things. But it's like, that's the thing, is what's actually changing. Nothing is actually going to change at the end. It's just everything in the middle. So tricky, dude.
As well mentioned that I think this whole reader...
Like, you want to think things change, but you have to remember they're not actually changing. But when it comes to us, are they? Do we have the power to actually change things? Because we're not a part of the story, technically. So you also have to look at it like that. We're that outside force that's assisting in changing these things. So, I mean, we've been stacking up variables then as we go along. Already. Like this right here. We're stacking, like, if this is technically not supposed to happen, is this a real change to the timeline? Mulani doesn't go through as much of a depressive state. And is she able to fight a battle better in that land that, you know, saved maybe a couple other people, and then those couple other people that were saved actually end up doing something in the future. You know what I mean? Like, is this a real change to the story that isn't honestly going to affect us? But if we were pretending this is real life, would that affect generations down the line? Potentially, right? Because it's us doing it. I think.
Violet ink into golden words. I don't know, I've just been kind of stuck on that thought for a long time. And while I'm writing this tangent in the margins, I may as well mention that I think this whole reader thing might relate to the purpose of visions. Remember how Venti said that anyone who gets a vision has the potential to become a god? Well, visions are called the eyes of God, and if reading is the true power of writing, and writing is the power of an author, then a vision could simply be eyes with which one reads. And if one has the power to read, then they can claim the power to write. Specifically, they write their own stories. They become the god of themselves, essentially. So perhaps the goal of some unknown entity in Teyvat is to give the people the power to write their own stories, just like they did in Simulanka. And if they can write their own stories, then they would be freeing themselves from the heavenly principles, from the clutches of a reader-turned-author who seeks to restrain them by writing their stories for them. And this is an interesting thought because the original visions were moon wheels, which had the ability to grant people a fragment of the moon's power. And we already know that the moons did possess the power of Logos to some degree, not just because Dottore said they did, but simply because they're moons. The power of moons is Kuvaki, it's moonlight, and moonlight is a reflection of sunlight. And if Nibelung is the sun, then isn't their power a reflection of his? I mean, consider the fact that the moons were supposed to be weaving the threads of fate for the world. Because if fate is time and time is the story of the world, then you could say that the moons were spinning yarns or telling tales. They were the magic pens entrusted with continuing the world's story while Nibelung was away. And if this is the case, and I think it is, then we finally know who planted Irminsul. Nibelung did. Now, I was already suspecting that this was the case because not only do we know that Irminsul is well over 6,000 years old, and that the Heavenly Principles is said to have altered rather than created Irminsul, and also the ley lines, making it unlikely that the world tree came from them, but we also have this passage in Hymns of the Far North where Nibelung is called Ianakoinen, which is another name for the primeval blacksmith in Finnish mythology, Ilmarinen. And Ilmarinen is credited for forging the world pillar. Now, this is also nothing I haven't said before, but because of the speed with which Genshin is now pumping out all that deep lore, I haven't really had time to sit and chew on all of this new information for as long as I'd like to. So the implications of this didn't really click with me until recently. See, Nibelung made both the moons and the bones of the earth, and in previous theories, I suggested that the moons are the bones of the earth, because moons have marrow and bones have marrow, and also Kuvaki is like blood, and moon marrow produces Kuvaki, and bone marrow produces blood, and you get the idea. Now, this interpretation isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't entirely right either, because if it was, then the moons and the bones of the earth wouldn't be mentioned as separate creations. I'm sorry I didn't make that connection earlier. There are just some things that—
Wait, what?
Kuvaki and bone marrow produces blood, and you get the idea. Now, this interpretation isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't entirely right either, because if it was, then the moons and the bones of the earth wouldn't be mentioned as separate creations. I'm sorry I didn't make that connection earlier. There are just some things that you don't really register as important until, you know, you have time to sit with them, which I haven't had. But if the moons are fate-weaving storytellers and Irminsul contains all the memories of the world, then Irminsul is basically a manifestation of the story of Teyvat. But the world tree is also a world pillar, and a world pillar is also known as the axis mundi because it's the pillar around which the world spins. So we might actually be able to think of Irminsul as the spindle of a spinning wheel, which makes the moons the spinners, and their marrows then become the mounds of wool that they spin into yarn or threads or stories that then get recorded in Irminsul. So if you think about it, the moons and Irminsul together make a complete bone because Irminsul is like the exterior hard bone structure that kind of holds everything together, and then the moons are the marrow that go inside and like do all of the creation work. And I think this is why Nahida and Rukkhadevata have so much in common with the moons and time and knowledge and their designs, among other things. The moons wield this ink that writes the story of the world on the paper that is fashioned from Irminsul because paper comes from trees. But this also makes me suspect that there must have been a point in Teyvat's history where things only existed as the seed of an idea that had yet to sprout. Without a tree to provide a rigid material structure to contain the story of Tevat, the actual structure of the world was probably a bit more loosey-goosey, like it was still being drafted. And this kind of matters because when a story is still being drafted, its causality is not yet set in stone. You can still do things like rewind time or erase things or put new things in. We saw a bunch of examples of this in Durin's story quest with all of the bad endings. And if the world was in a drafted state at that time, then that could explain why in the Nod Cry teaser trailer, the time when the Moon Sisters governed the world was also a time when there was no separation between life and death. The story of time was a work in progress. So like, Nibelung's out there in deep space, trying to figure out how to write the best future for his little world in light of this abyssal threat that Voyager warned him about, and along comes this descender who reads the story and effectively hits publish. And as an author, Nibelung would have been mostly powerless against a reader.
Man,
so obviously the only option left to him was to try and use the power of the forbidden knowledge, the abyssal ink, to try to erase the first descender's existence. Which obviously didn't work, but it could explain why Genshin talks about blackened suns all the time. Because, you know, one of the names given to the heavenly principles is Phanes, who is a deity whose body is made entirely of light. And yes, it is also another way to talk about an eclipse, a blackened sun. But remember, Nibelung's pens would have been the moons, so I still think this fits pretty nicely, especially since he turned the moons into a weapon. But okay, so, recap. The moons. They wrote the story of the world in Nibelung's place, so they were basically like Anya's pens, but for Nibelung. And that's why Dottore wanted their power to become a pseudo-descender. He wanted to become
be able to write the next chapter. Okay, so this makes sense.
So the world could no longer control him, he would control the world.
Right.
Now, I think he's attempted to do this a couple of times, but his most recent and noteworthy attempt might have been with Wanderer. Yes, on the one hand, he was trying to make Wanderer into a god, but he never specified what kind of god he was trying to make him into, or even if he expected it to work at all. And this experiment hinged on the power of the Gnosis, which is a fragment of another descender. So his hypothesis was probably, can I turn someone into a descender using a fragment of another descender?
Fair.
To which the answer appears to have been no. So he probably deemed this experiment a failure and moved on to trying to capture the moons. Now here's a question that I don't think any of you have asked yourselves. Where do you think the moons did all of this writing, all of this weaving of fate? Well, in Anya's story, the gods gave the world...
Where do you think the moons did all the writing? The local bar.
Outside a castle, the magic of storytelling. Now, Simi Lanka is an allegory for Tevat, so we can infer that Tevat is also a world outside of a castle. Or perhaps I should call it a palace. A lunar palace. Because the lunar palace, where we know the Moon Sisters spent a lot of time, is very likely to be the place where they wove fate from. Now let's take this a step further by making a small assumption. Since the lunar palace is likely the place where stories were written, then perhaps we should think of it as a mind palace, also known as a memory palace, memory space, or memory journey. Now, the concept of a mind palace is actually part of a memory enhancement technique that's called the method of loci. The method basically involves imagining a physical space like the layout of a building. This is the mind palace. After you've done that, you condense something you want to remember into the shape of a recognizable object, like a souvenir, and then you place that object somewhere in the palace. By using spatial recognition, you can then walk through the mind palace to quickly locate specific memories. And can I just say that this concept makes me really suspicious of the fact that the traveler is collecting souvenirs from all these parts of their journey. And it kind of recontextualizes the rarity level that's been ascribed to them. Because like, the 5-star ones, the gold ones, might be the most important story beats. Memories of the main plotline. While everything else of the lower rarities are different levels of importance for the rest of the world building. They're little side stories. If a descender can one day become a god, then having all of these memories that they can put within their mind palace feels kind of important.
What's another thing that had like the mind palace? God. I swear there was a movie that has something like this, and I can't remember what the name of it was. Damn it.
Now, if I'm right about the lunar palace being a mind palace of sorts, then we should also recognize that most of the process of writing happens within the mind, which means that the mind is the space outside of the story. Or perhaps the story is outside of the mind, since, the storybook world was outside of the castle. No matter which way you think about it, this lunar palace writer's room has to exist outside the boundaries of Tevat's time, since time is defined by the story and the story exists outside the castle. And this concept has a lot of precedence in the greater Hoyoverse. And I'm not just talking about Amphorius this time. In the latest Honkai Impact 3rd storyline, the goddess of Mars literally has access to a dream space, which kinda does exactly what I said the Lunar Palace does. I'm not gonna explain all the specifics of it beyond that, but Homo Labs made a really good video about it, so you can watch that if you're interested. Alright, with all those factoids and theories and assumptions under our belt, we can finally talk about all of the time shenanigans surrounding Columbina. And I hope you're ready, because I am certainly not. At the end of Act 6, Columbina escapes Dottore by falling into her own moon gate, and then she vanishes, which raises a very interesting question. Where does this moon gate lead? Now, in a previous video, I said that the moon gate should go to the moon, and that should be the case. All of the evidence that we have points to that, except it might not have gone to the physical moon. And yeah, I mean, that makes sense since, Columbina could have just walked through her own moon gate to get to the moon instead of going through all this trouble with the Hyperborean ritual and whatnot.
Correct, is what I said.
But, when I was thinking about this, I was just like, well, maybe she just lacked the power necessary to complete the trip. Maybe she can only open the moon gate to warp short distances. She has been really weak and low on Kuvaki lately. But at the end of the quest, the traveler and the quest description says that Columbina actually fell into the moon's reflection. And incidentally, the moon's reflection is also where the iridescent moon fled to after her remains fell to Conria, and it's what allowed her to stay lucid for so long. But if the moon gate is supposed to go to the moon but doesn't actually take you to the physical moon, then is it possible that the moon gate actually takes you to the lunar palace? Because, if the Lunar Palace is a shared mind palace, then it's not subject to the laws of time within Tevat, so it could explain how the iridescent moon survived so long. And then in Natlan, we learned that the Night Kingdom, where all Natlan's memories were stored, was a reflection of Natlan. And the light of the moon is merely the light that's reflected from the sun, and if the original sun was Nibelung, then the power of the moon is the reflected power of the sun. So that would make the moon's reflection the story of the moons, or the place where the moons go to tell their stories and use their writing powers. So my hypothesis is that Columbina is currently in the process of pulling a Durin and becoming the author of her own story. And what's funny is that in hindsight, Columbina actually says this straight up multiple times. She calls the moon, quote, the home where her story is written. And she even says her, quote, prologue lies beyond the false skies. What an intriguing choice.
Ooh.
As her, quote, prologue lies...
I do not even remember my name.
Beyond the false skies. What an intriguing choice of words in light of all this new context. And if I'm right about the moon's reflection going to the lunar palace, which is like a mind palace for the moon goddesses, then there's actually a very easy to explain scenario where Columbina could go to the lunar palace and meet the other three moons in the lunar palace, because that space exists outside the story, outside the boundaries of time and causality. She could exchange information with the other moons because we know they met thanks to these lines from the iridescent moon.
Not time travel.
Now, I'm just extrapolating and speculating here, but I think that within the confines of the Lunar Palace, Columbina might be able to realize that she, much like Durin, could graft herself to an existing story within Tevat. Namely, the story of the fourth moon that never rose into the sky and instead became the island of Nod Cry. And I think she could have then taken advantage of Isla, the last archpriestess of the Frost Moon Scions, because Isla was not only the one who witnessed Columbina's birth, but she also was the one who foresaw it, because she apparently had the ability to see through time. Or did she? Because the circumstances of her getting this power are really, really strange, because she's supposed to have gotten it after killing her grandmother Lovia. The problem is, Lovia wasn't a real Frost Moon Scion. She was never in possession of the Frost Moon Scion blood. She couldn't use the power of Kuvaki, so how how would the power to see through time have gone to Isla from Lovia, when Lovia should have never had it? Well, I think there's just some really weirdly coincidental timing happening here. Because Isla's ability to see through time seems to be an awful lot like the phantom phenomenon that's caused by the trilunar syzygy.
Yeah, true.
So what if it was
Especially because we could kind of interact with it. Isla looked like she was looking at us, even though she didn't talk to us, but we could also interact with that. So it's like she's from the past interacting with the present, in her eyes, I guess the future, just like the phantoms were interacting with our present or their future. Right?
Columbina who gave Isla the vision of her own birth. Could she not have planted a small seed of knowledge within Isla's mind, and that seed of inspiration created a chain reaction that resulted in the Pillar of Embla reactivating and printing Columbina, who remembered nothing because she only had just entered the story at that time when she was born? And if that sounds familiar, it's probably because this happened to the Abyss Twin too, with Conria. They woke up without their memories too at the beginning of their story.
Yep.
Now this could explain some of the time travel-y weirdness, but there are some things that remain unsolved here. But to explain those, I'm gonna reference a couple of pretty popular theories.
So, to reiterate, the Frost Moon Scions, or Jesus Christ, the old moons actually were the writers of the story underneath Nibelung. They were writing as Nibelung left, but in order to write the story, they weren't actually part. Basically, if you consider the firmament as like an enclosed time loop in itself, or enclosed, like, I don't want to say time loop, but its time is enclosed in that firmament, and the moons were outside of that firmament, so they're outside of the causality of Teyvat, and that's where they wrote the stories. Because they have to, obviously, as a writer, you're the outside perspective. The moon's writing it, though. But, okay, let's just go with this. And then Columbina actually went to the Lunar Palace where they were writing it instead of back in time 6,000 years ago, or whatever it was, to meet with them. They just all met at this one location that's outside of time, which is also kind of similar to what Venti said, because Venti blew the time of Marjavari off of the map, so it's like in that place we're able to see things from different periods of time. It's not on the causality of Teyvat anymore. It's just people, oh my god, wait, yeah, Marjavari. People are all able to converge there from different periods of time. Right? So the Lunar Palace could be similar to that. And it would actually make what she's saying make a lot more sense. Okay, so they're all meeting there, and Columbina is writing her own future there. However many years ago, before the fall of the moons. She didn't remember her own name. The moon is where she gets her pass from, the prologue to her story. Okay. All right. This is making sense. I like this. So there actually is no time travel. You're just going off of the map. You're leaving the map. You're leaving the causality of Teyvat. And all things can converge there from any point of time. From any point of perceived time of Teyvat.
Unsolved here. But to explain those, I'm gonna reference a couple of pretty popular theories. So the first theory is this one that's written by Koi and my friend Leah, there's a link below, and they argue that Columbina must have entered a fifth dimension through her moon gate, kind of like in the movie Interstellar, which then allowed her to transcend time and mess with the past. Specifically, they're arguing that Columbina must have been the one responsible for pointing out the right books in the library, erecting the shield over Hisi Island during the fight with Rerir, and also naming herself in the past. Now, being the staunch time travel hater that I am, I was initially not very enthusiastic about this idea, and yet, somehow I ended up in the exact same place but with the Mind Palace solution in place of the whole fifth dimension thing. And I also agree with the two of them that Columbina is likely the one who's responsible for these things and probably some more stuff that we don't even know know about.
flipping the car
However,
too?
unlike Koi and Leah, who can just say, hey, time travel to change the past, I can't do that because of all the things I've laid out in this video so far. My whole thesis relies on the condition that you cannot change the past because it breaks the rules of causality. So how can Columbina be responsible for all these things without breaking causality? That is the real question. And I think Roosevelt might have gotten the answer right when she suggested that Luonatar was responsible for all of this. Now, Roosevelt does argue that Luonatar is actually Columbina, but like the Columbina from the past, partially because she's way too special looking for a Kuhenki, and she's also far too affectionate to not be Columbina. You should watch her whole video for the full thesis, though. I'm obviously not doing it justice here. But while I am on board with Luonatar being responsible for a lot of these things, at least in part, I'm not really on board with the idea that she is Columbina, partly because she often has these moments of confusion that are completely out of character for the Moon Maiden.
I said 50-50.
And Luonatar isn't technically that unique. She's actually just a type of Kuhenki that's had thousands of years to mature. Also, Columbina even says that this particular Luonatar that we've been following this whole time was not one that was born of her blessing, so it had to come from somewhere else. Now that said, Nicole...
I think, like I said before, Luonatar may not be a direct form of Columbina, and while I was kind of like, 50-50, they could both exist, I still think that Luonatar could be more of a contingency plan from the other moons to help in the future, potentially. If they're a blessing, because I think it was Cat with Blue Hat mentioned the whole, they could be a blessing of the other moons, and I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. If they went back in time and needed kind of these beings and these more supreme beings, being Luonatar, to influence stuff in the future and lead them maybe on a certain path. That could kind of make sense.
Says that Columbina's birth and nod cry was the dying wish of the previous moon goddesses, and we know that these Kuhenki take...
Wait, when the hell did she say that? That is perhaps due to the lingering connection between the frost moon, which was not shattered in this world. You could see it as the three sisters' dying wish.
Or else. Now that said, Nicole says that Columbina's birth and nod cry was the dying wish of the previous moon goddesses, and we know that these Kuhenki take thousands of years to form, and the moons died like, what, 6,000 years ago? So there is a possible scenario where Columbina travels to the lunar palace where she could meet the lingering consciousnesses of the moon goddesses. We know from the iridescent moon's words that they were a bit confused as to why she showed up or what her purpose was, but they did seem to understand who she was and what her existence could mean. So is it possible that the moon goddesses at the time of their death took a gamble and left behind a wish or a legend or a prophecy that one day a fourth moon could be born into
Holy
that?
shit! Wait, I literally said this in the past video.
Perhaps Luonatar and all the other Kuhenki were born of that same wish and were responsible for caring for Columbina in place of her dead sisters. And if I'm right about this scenario, then maybe Luonatar knew the Traveler because Columbina told the moon goddesses about them, and they told Luonatar, which is why she recognized them right away and knew what to do. And maybe she was also told to protect Hisi Island and received a special power to do so. Both Seelies and the moons are very gifted in the skill of prophecy. Who's to say they didn't foresee all of this? And this could explain why Luonatar is weirdly helpful sometimes, but not all the time. Now, the best part of this scenario for me is that the fourth moon already existed as Nod Cry. So the moons didn't need to break causality to make this happen. All they needed to do was plant the seed of an idea within the story. They imbued the fourth moon's existence.
But what the fuck just happened? But wait, did it exist then? Do we know that? I don't know if my time's not right there. Or the timing's not right there. Is it because 6,000 years ago, couldn't she, if she's going up to the Lunar Palace, couldn't they have still been alive then? Not, like, destroyed? And therefore... But it's like, yeah, it's off the timeline, but it's like, what form of the moons exist if what she's saying is right about the Lunar Palace, right? And it's off of the timeline. Okay, Columbina goes there through the moon gate. Okay, but what form of the moons do you get there? You know what I mean? Like, do you get them in the state of pre-blown upness? Or nah? And it's like, therefore, would you get them in a state before Nod Cry is a thing? Because how are we going to explain the whole Welkin Moon thing now?
To say they didn't foresee all of this. And this could explain why Luonatar is weirdly helpful sometimes, but not all the time. Now, the best part of the scenario for me is that the fourth moon already existed as Nod Cry, so the moons didn't need to break causality to make this happen. All they needed to do was plant the seed of an idea within the story. They imbued the fourth moon's existence with a new meaning, and once enough time had passed, that idea within that seed would take root and sprout. And thus, Columbina would be born from an idea. And this is almost exactly what I think happened with A and the Sacred Sakura.
Okay.
A Sakura tree likely already existed, but Makoto had a dying wish. She dreamed of a tree that could protect Inazuma, and she entrusted that dream to A, who took it and gave that tree new meaning in the present, which allowed that thought to ripple through time. This process is directly referenced in the parable of the tree in the book Before Sun and Moon, where it says, "Your one thought shall echo throughout time." That echoing thought is the future recontextualizing the past and granting the world new variables with which to make an even better, newer future with. And be real with me for a second. Do you think it's a coincidence that Makoto's realm of consciousness looks just like the surface of a moon? Because I sure don't. Not with this context. As for the issue of Columbina's name, I think it's possible she told the moon goddesses the name she wished to have, but it's also possible that her name is merely a manifestation of her fate, because names are the role that one takes within the story of Tevat. They represent fate itself,
you grow into
right?
your name.
So hyposelenia means born beneath the moons, which she was always destined to be since the fourth moon was always below her sister since it never rose into the sky.
You
and the name
grow
Columbina
into your
comes from the
name.
word columba, which is a genus of doves, or rather, pigeons, and, well, as Wanderer says, pigeons are very good at finding their way home. And Columbina's home is on the moon, because that's where her story, her prologue, began. Ooh, that was a long theory, and there are still things I didn't even get around to mentioning, so I'm gonna continue yapping while all these questionably
Like
sane channel members
Alice.
titillate our senses by rolling across the screen in a very predictable way. But I specifically want to talk about Durin because this stuff wouldn't fit anywhere else in the theory, and I tried. I really did. So I've been lightheartedly referring to Durin as Baby Nibelung since he was revealed, not because I thought he actually was a Nibelung reincarnation or anything, but because he was just such a good allegorical fit for the role and it was just fun to think about. And now that Durin has become the author of his own story, and he also has a dualistic form of light and dark, and he also has power over the abyss, well, the comparison suits him even more. But I've already kind of said this, and I think it's pretty obvious for anyone who's paying attention to notice. And if I left it there, it would have just been a cool little detail. But then I noticed something. The song that plays during the final cutscene with Durin and Anya, it is so similar to Greensleeves, which was originally a ballad about a tragic love featuring a woman with green sleeves. But the tune is probably more easily recognized with its more modern lyrics, and also its more modern name, What Child Is This? And that song is about baby Jesus, the son of Mary. And then I started wondering if that was the intent here, because Anya Andersdotter goes by the codename M on account of her middle name, and her middle name is Mary, making Durin the son of Mary, and allegorically Nibelung, who is God, which would make Durin Jesus? And that's funny in its own way, because Durin like Jesus, was born because of a prophecy, and both Durin and Jesus died once only to be resurrected and leave behind an empty tomb. And under the belief of the Trinity, God exists in three forms: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I don't know who the Holy Spirit is unless it's dead Durin, but Nibelung is called the Formidable Father, so if Durin is the son, then I don't know, man, maybe calling him Baby Nibel was vibe-based theorizing done right. It also makes me wonder about him being called the Undying Flame, because a flame gives off light, and Nibelung being the allegorical sun also has the power of light. And I don't know how many of you have actually read The Little Witch and the Undying Fire. You probably should, it's pretty good. But basically that book is about a little witch whose job it is to find the undying fire. And in the end, the undying fire appears to be the spirit of an old witch who dies, and that old witch is supposed to be Anya. So the undying fire is supposed to represent the story that Anya leaves behind, hence why Durin has the title The Undying Fire. But it also makes me wonder a little bit more about Voyager, because Voyager was a bit of a scribe. They were supposed to go around the universe collecting all of these stories about all these different planets and civilizations. And I just wonder if, looking at Nibelung, they saw the undying fire. They saw a story that was more bright and beautiful than any other story they've ever seen before. And if so, that would connect Voyager to the Hexen Circle, which has implications I don't know if I really want to get into right now, and I'm really side-eyeing Octavia at this point. Also, if you didn't know, the lore of Durin's sword is actually the continuation of The Little Witch and the Undying Fire, and it seems to me at least to be referring to the story of Nibelung, allegorically. But I do like the idea of a story being like a little light that you carry within you forever. I think that's pretty cute. Now I gotta say, there's a lot of stuff that I had to cut from this video. Even though this video is super long, there's
just
stuff
make a part
that
two.
still didn't make
Just
the
make
cut.
a part
For
two.
example, if time is a story within a book, then perhaps the Mare Javari, which is a place that Venti sort of blew off the timeline, is just a page that got ripped out of the book. And then Asmodee, as the Shade of Space, might actually have the ability to pass through the pages of the book. In fact, I do wonder if the fact that she, like, contains space within cubes is her way of, like, preserving different drafts of the world, different fragments of the story that got blown off or forgotten or discarded or whatever. And speaking of preserving time, I got to thinking about Vetterflnir again, because when we meet him within Tevat, he's, like, talking to us through that giant purple crystal thing, which still looks a lot like the crystal that Deshret turned into. I am not letting that theory die until I have to. And I might not have to, because Vetterflnir says he'll be waiting for us at the end of time. But the end of time would either be the end of the storybook, or it could be that his location is actually within the Lunar Palace. And I'm still not over the fact that the portal Rukkhadevata opened for Deshret looks an awful lot like a moon gate. Because if it is, that means Deshret may have ended up in the Lunar Palace as well. Not that I necessarily think he's alive or anything,
we walk in
but,
there, it's just
you know,
a big
he might
circle
show up
of
as
all
like a
these
purple
people.
gemstone souvenir.
Oh my god, wait a minute. That would actually be absolutely insane. Nodcry is supposed to be the convergence of a lot of these world quests. Imagine they're all just seated around this big-ass table inside this palace. That'd be nutty, bruh. That'd be nutty.
Here, and maybe that's how Vetterflnir is communicating, a la Heart's Desire, for those of you who've read that book. And actually, speaking of books, a lot of the books within the game get completely recontextualized when you start looking at it through this lens. Vera's Melancholy comes to mind, with Ike saying only the future can save the past kind of thing. I also think a lot about Time Tracker, which talks about closed causal loops. That story applies to the paradox of the key, but it's also interesting because that story looks at time as if it's been bounced between two different mirrors. So mirrors are basically reflecting time, and that makes me think of the moon's reflection, and then I just kind of go full circle being like, oh, he just kind of exited the timeline and then came back. Oh my god, I can't believe there are still notes on this notepad, all these things I didn't talk about yet.
Oh my
I think
god.
I'm just gonna let you guys do it in the comment section,
Ashikai.
because if I keep going
listen.
anymore, my editor really will hunt me down.
Just make a part 2. Just send it. All these channel members.
And I think
We
that
just gotta make
altercation
part
will not
two. We
end
just
well.
gotta keep
so
it
let's
cooking.
wrap things up. I know I was a bit all over the place in this theory, but, you know, I had a lot to say. And you know what? It's also totally okay if I failed to convince you that time travel isn't happening in Tevat, because that really wasn't my goal here. I really just wanted to provide a counter argument to the time travel answer, partly because I think it keeps things more interesting, partly because I think that's probably not entirely what Hoyo's going for, because the book metaphor seems to be a little bit more in line with the repeating themes that we see throughout their game.
Well, and plus anything else before has never really been time travel. They've never really, like she said in the Paradox Key video, it's never really been time travel in any of their games. It's always been some form of interaction with the past or a paradox or something, but there's never, like, we never see, I guess, the start of a time travel loop. Like, we're never just, oh, hey, yo, let's build a time machine and go back in time and change this thing to affect the future. It's never that. It's never that. It's always a paradox, a loop that's already in the works. It's never just direct. But then again, it's like, how do you define time travel? I guess it could get down to semantics too about what you define as time travel. Because like I said, if they're all going to, in her idea, all going to this lunar palace, well, it's like, okay, let's just say the current form of Columbina just went there. Well, what form of the moon's going in? You know, like what time of the timeline or their timeline are we interacting with them there? Because there's got to be some form, right? But it's like, is it 6,000 years ago form? Is it Meryl form? Like, what is it? What is the form that we're meeting on the lunar palace? And how long ago was this? Because she said Nod Cry would have already been the fourth moon shattered. Well, we don't even talk about the Welkin Moon in this. She didn't even bring up anything about the Welkin Moon. How does Welkin Moon play a role? Like, what ends up being Welkin Moon? Like I said, everyone's saying Columbina's Welkin Moon, but I still don't think that's defined unless, I don't know, we might get it from the story. But as of right now, based on the 6.2 story and just the card of Columbina in the drip marketing, you cannot say she's definitively the Welkin Moon. So it's like, how does she end up coming to form, potentially being that Welkin Moon? And what actually does Luanatar do?
Games, and partly because I'm just a time travel hater and I'm gonna cope until I can't cope no mope. More.
Well, no, it
that
makes
one.
sense.
But if you do like the time travel argument instead of what I presented, then I'd love to recommend this channel to you. This channel has gone above and beyond when it comes to trying to explain certain phenomenon into that using real math and real physics. So if you like time travel, you'll probably love that. I hate time travel, I still loved that. Okay, I'm actually going for real now, so thank you all my lovely channel members for all your direct support. You guys are amazing. And I will, of course, issue another thanks to you, dear viewer, for watching this incredibly long video. Make sure to grab a snack, drink some water, and take care of yourselves until I see you again in the next video and also in the new year. Because it's the end of 2025. We're going into 2026. Oh my god. Time moves so fast. So this is me signing off. I'll see you next time.
Or does it move at all? No, that was great. That was great. That was honestly W. My remaining questions, obviously, I mean, I can't lie, you kind of let me down. I needed a little bit of Alice in there, and I got none. But that's okay. That's okay. It wasn't the topic of the video. It wasn't the topic of the video, so we can let that one slide, all right? But just make a part 2, please. Somebody talk about Alice, for the love of God. I just want some opinions on Alice, bro. Nobody is going to say that Alice is just letting this happen. And also, she didn't make a connection with the whole Marjavari thing. Like, Marjavari's blown off of the map, too. And we literally went there to converge. So she brings up the whole Lunar Palace idea and how we can go there to converge with them off of the timeline. But we literally kind of did that with Marjavari. Like, right? Alice is Asmodee's child. Okay. No, that's just not possible because Alice is far superior to Asmodee. Anyways. So I think her whole lunar, us going to who knows if it's a lunar palace, right? I mean, that she put all that together, sure, but it could be somewhere that's also blown off of the timeline. I didn't even think of it that way. That's a great way to think of it. She followed it up to explain why it could have been the lunar palace because the moon's need somewhere to write. So I like that theory, but no matter where the hell we're at, it does make sense that we're not going back in time completely. I don't know. Like, not in a direct, just jump back in time, tell me what the name is, and let's do this for the future. But I also like how she followed up with the whole Luanatar part, too. The Luanatar not being directly Columbina, I agree. I was hesitant even watching Cat with Blue Hat's theory about that. It's like, I don't know. Her being a major influence matters, for sure. But, yeah, the direct association with, this Luanatar is just going to turn into Columbina, chances are pretty damn low. Pretty damn low in my opinion. But I'm curious to see how this Welkin Moon comes to being. I like the thought of Luanatar as a contingency plan. Blessings of the other 3 moons. I like that. But then how does Columbina... I mean, we really, even through all this, how to change the past without traveling through time is like, we still don't really get how exactly she even thinks Columbina is going to be reborn. How is Columbina going to be reborn? I don't know. I think there's so many ways that she could be at this point, or come back into the fold basically and be playable. Like I think there's a couple of different ways they could do it. Contingency plan. You could throw it out there where the Luanatar turns into her. Sure. I mean, that's not completely not possible, right? We go through a moon gate of our own and rip her out of the goddamn thing. Who knows? I'm interested to see what is going to happen. Overall, though, W. All right, let's read some of these. Nahida's related to the moon. I mean, her whole point about that was the moons are also a part Nibelung to right, just as Irminsul was a part in the whole bones of the world. So it's like they're a system. They're, it's like one wheel moves the other type of thing. It's a moving system. They all exist for a reason. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. They're all, if it's Nibelung's story, Nibelung's world, it makes sense that he's the one who puts Irminsul there. He obviously is the one who made the moons, right? But then she did say, what's his name comes along, Primordial One comes along, is the reader, and basically hits the publish on the book from the moons, which would have brought Nibelung back angry, uses his dark power to try to fix it, but that doesn't work. Which, yeah, he would be pissed about that, but it's like, you come back, you hit publish, you hit the enter button, but then you're still trying to rip that power from the moons into your shades. Like, he publishes the book, but then he's also trying to change things at the same time. Like, how does that work? How does he publish what the moons were writing, but then also try to change it at the same time? He's adding on to it? As a reader, if we're saying the first Ascender is a reader, well, then who's actually writing it at this point? Unless it's the shades ripping the power from the moon to then be the shades of the new writers, and he's then still acting as that first reader in return for, like, his shades of the writers, he's still the reader. But I mean, this guy's been asleep. I'm honestly, real. I'm starting to believe this guy doesn't even exist. I mean, I'm just saying, how are you still sleeping, brother? There's way too much going on. Like, we shattered a whole chair up there. Like, one of your shades is missing. I don't think the shades can be writers. Well, I'm just saying, like, if she said in this video that the moons were potentially the writers for Nibelung, right, while he was gone, and then the Primordial One came in and hit publish, well, if that's the case, then who's still writing? They kind of did write, though. So, like, did he actually hit publish, or did he just rip writing power away from them? You see what I'm saying? Because it's like, if they came and helped write the law, or write the humans in the world, right? The humans, and help shape the world through the shades and everything like that. Like, he's still writing. Why would he hit publish? I'm just going off of, I don't know if you watched the whole thing, you know what I mean? So I'm just going off of this. I'm trying to think of where she said it. Actually, give me 1 second. Let me pee really quick. And then we'll check that part. Hold on. Uno momento. Okay, hold on. Let me try to find that part. I mean, this part kind of got dank. No, it's not here.
The story, which is really interesting to me because the power of Logos is usually depicted as being gold, while the power of the Abyss is generally depicted as purple. Something you'll notice is that when Anya,
no, it's not
then
here.
Essentially the traveler's ability to absorb is called the eyes of God, and if reading is the true power of writing, and writing is the power of an author,
was it before
then
this?
a vision could simply be eyes. Then isn't their power a reflection of his? I mean, consider the fact that the power of Logos to some degree, not just because Dottore said they did, but simply because they're moons. The power of moons is Kuvaki, it's moonlight, and moonlight is a reflection of sunlight, and if Nibelung is the sun, then isn't their power a reflection of his? I mean, consider the fact that the moons were supposed to be weaving the threads of fate for the world. Because if fate is time, and time is the story of the world, then you could say that the moons were spinning yarns, or telling tales. They were the magic fate for the world. Because if fate is time, and time is the story of the world, then you could say that the moons were spinning yarns, or telling tales. They were the magic pens entrusted with continuing the world's story while Nibelung was away. And if this is the case, and I think it is, then we finally know who planted Irminsul. Nibelung did. Now, I was already suspecting that this was the case because not only do we know that—
I mean, real talk, who else is in the mix? Who else is in the mix for planting this fucking tree?
Irminsul is well over 6,000 years old, and that the Heavenly Principles is said to have altered rather than created Irminsul and also the ley lines, making it unlikely that the world tree came from them. But we also have this passage in Hymns of the Far North where Nibelung is called Iannakoinen, which is another name for the primeval blacksmith in Finnish mythology, Ilmarinen. And Ilmarinen is credited for forging the world pillar.
I mean, think about it. If the only other one in the mix is the primordial one, like there's no way. Like, who else? Unless it was already somehow in existence before Nibelung, but we know nothing about that. Like, we know nothing about that.
Now, this is also nothing I haven't said before, but because of the speed with which Genshin is now pumping out all that deep lore, I haven't really had time to sit and chew on all of this new information for as long as I'd like to. So the implications of this didn't really click with me until recently. See, Nibelung made both the moons and the bones of the earth, and in previous theories, I suggested that the moons are the bones of the earth because moons have marrow and bones have marrow, and also Kuvaki is like blood and moon marrow produces Kuvaki and bone marrow produces blood, and you get the idea. Now, this interpretation isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't entirely right either, because if it was, then the moons and the bones—
I mean, when you kind of look at it, moons are just leftover asteroid dust from a planet's creation. So in a way, it's like the planet's created, asteroids colliding, right? Then moons are kind of technically the bones of Teyvat. If you consider Teyvat, you know what I mean? Like, right? It's all made of the same shit. It's all made of space rock. Right?
Then moon marrow produces Kuvaki as bones of the earth, and in me until recently. See, Nibelung made both the moons and the bones of the earth, and in previous theories, I suggested that the moons are the bones of the earth because moons have marrow and bones have marrow, and also Kuvaki is like blood and moon marrow produces Kuvaki and bone marrow produces blood, and you get the idea. Now, this interpretation isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't entirely right either, because if it was, then the moons and the bones of the earth wouldn't be mentioned as separate creations. I'm sorry I didn't make that connection earlier. There are just some things that you don't really register as important until,
I still don't get what she's... I reminded this part earlier.
And also Kuvaki is like blood and moon marrow produces Kuvaki and bone marrow produces blood, and you get the idea. Now, this interpretation isn't entirely wrong, but it isn't entirely right either, because if it was, then the moons and the bones of the earth wouldn't be mentioned as separate creations.
The moons and...
Because if it was, then the moons and the bones of the earth wouldn't be mentioned as separate creations.
Teyvat's three moons and their goddesses were brought into being by the will of Nibelung, the then ruler of Teyvat.
I'm sorry I didn't make that connection earlier. There are just some things that you don't really register as important until, you have time to sit with them.
Well, I don't see why not. Like, we know, I mean, like I just said, the moon is just leftover remnants of the Earth, for like our physical moon and our sky. Earth sky is literally just leftover asteroid dust from fucking the creation of the planet Earth, right? Like, it was just asteroid dust that was orbiting the Earth that ended up coalescing into a moon, right? I mean, technically, the same thing is true here. If we're talking about the physical moons, I mean, we're also talking about physical spherical moons, right? But also moon goddesses and entities. So if we're talking about just the physical moons itself, then yeah, it's like Tevat, and the physical moons could all be made of the same stuff, because that's how it works in real life. It's all just space rock. So, but we consider it differently. Moons are different than the Earth, even though they're made of essentially the same stuff.
Which I haven't had. But if the moons are fate-weaving storytellers and Irminsul contains all the memories of the world, then Irminsul is basically a manifestation of the story of Tevat. But the world tree is also a world pillar, and a world pillar is also known as the axis mundi because it's the pillar around which the world spins. So we might actually be able to think of Irminsul as the spindle of a spinning wheel, which makes the moons the spinners, and their marrows then become the mounds of wool that they spin into yarn or threads or stories that then get recorded in Irminsul. So if you think about it,
I mean, then you break it down to where it's like, okay, we'll just treat Irminsul as Earth and the moon entities themselves, the goddesses, as then the moons. You're talking about the same things. They're both made of the same creations. It's just, now we're talking about it in more of a metaphor form.
the moons and Irminsul together make a complete bone because Irminsul is like the exterior hard bone structure that kind of holds everything together, and then the moons are the marrow that go inside and like do all of the creation work. And I think this is why Nahida and Rukkhadevata have so much in common with the moons and time and knowledge and their designs, among other things.
She's the fourth, dude, I swear to God, how many different characters have been predicted to be the moon goddess? Or like the fourth moon, the Welkin moon.
This ink that writes the story of the world on the paper that is fashioned from Irminsul because paper comes from trees. But this also makes me suspect that there must have been a point in Tevat's history where things only existed as the seed of an idea that had yet to sprout. Without a tree to provide a rigid material structure to contain the story of Tevat, the actual structure of the world was probably a bit more loosey-goosey, like it was still being drafted. And this kind of matters because when a story is still being drafted, its causality is not yet set in stone. You can still do things like rewind time or erase things or put new things in. We saw a bunch of examples of this in Durin's story quest with all of the bad endings. And if the world was in a drafted state at that time, then that could explain why in the Nod Cry teaser trailer, the time when the Moon Sisters governed the world was also a time when there was no separation between life and death. The story of time was a work in progress. So like, Nibelung's out there in deep space, trying to figure out how to write the best future for his little world in light of this abyssal threat that Voyager warned him about, and along comes this descender who reads the story and effectively hits publish. And as an author, Nibelung would have been mostly powerless against—
He's saying he went out there to get more knowledge to write a better writing. But they got blocked by this dude who just showed up randomly.
A reader. So obviously the only option left to him was to try and use the power of the forbidden knowledge, the abyssal ink, to try to erase the first Descender's existence. Which obviously didn't work, but it could explain why Genshin talks about blackened suns all the time. Because, you know, one of the names given to the heavenly principles is Phanes, who is a deity whose body is made entirely of light. And yes, it is also another way to talk about an eclipse, a blackened sun. But remember, Nibelung's pens would have been the moons, so I still think this fits pretty nicely, especially since he turned the moons into a weapon. But okay, so, recap. The moons. They wrote the story of the world in Nibelung's place, so they were basically like Anya's pens, but for Nibelung. And that's why Dottore wanted their power to become a pseudo-descender. He wanted to become an author, so the world could no longer control him, he would control the world. Now, I think he's attempted to do this a couple of times, but his most recent—
Right, but like then why does that make sense? Unless the first Descender actually was ripping the power from the moons and giving it to the shades. If the moons were the writers, but we know that the first Descender got along with the moons. So he could have been playing to get along with the moons and slow dripping them into a different power source. Like he was lying to them almost and being friendly with them. In order to drip their power of writing, so that way he could do it. Because why else did Dottore want to then steal the power of the moons to then be the writer? You know what I mean? So it's like, how did... It's weird, because you have Descender being nice with them, but they hold this supreme power that we know he had to have kind of used to write something. Right? Like, he wrote something. Like, he's the primordial one. Like, he wrote shit. Like, we can't assume that... Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely wrote something. I mean, there's no way Nibelung had these shades written into the story, right? So at the very least, we know he wrote his shades into existence. Right? So it said they were nice with them, but I don't think it ever said that, like, the HP was stealing their power, did it? Like, that's still not confirmed, but it could kind of be assumed that he was stealing their power in a way. Because otherwise, how would he get this power to write? And why would Dottore assume the same thing, that he could take their power to write? Based on this here.
And noteworthy attempt might have been with Wanderer. Yes, on the one hand, he was trying to make Wanderer into a god, but he never specified what kind of god he was trying to make him into, or even if he expected it to work at all. And this experiment hinged on the power of the Gnosis, which is a fragment of another Descender. So his hypothesis was probably, can I turn someone into a Descender using a fragment of another Descender? To which the answer appears to have been no. So he probably deemed this experiment a failure and moved on to trying to capture the moons. Now here's a question that I don't think any of you have asked.
And using a piece of a Descender to turn that person into a Descender would have led him to, if that would have worked, it would have led him to the same conclusion that he's at right now, where he's trying to... See, what is he actually trying to become, though? Does he think the power of the moons is actually going to make him a Descender? Or is he going to bypass the whole Descender thing and then just be able to write because he has the power of the moons? Like, if the moons have the power to write, what the hell is the point of being a Descender if you have the power of the moons? You already have the power of the moons now. So you don't even have to be a Descender, you're just a writer. It's like you just skip the Descender part. And the Descender is just supposed to be the one that reads the story. Right? Like us as a Descender, we're reading Durin's story. We're acting as the reader. We're not writing it. Durin's writing it now. Part of it was already written. We never wrote anything. We just read it to interpret it. So Descender doesn't even mean writer. Descender means reader. Oh...
Asked yourselves, where do you think the moons did all of this writing, all of this weaving of fate? Well, in Anya's story, the gods gave the world outside a castle the magic of storytelling. Now, Sri-Lanka is an allegory for Tevat, so we can infer that Tevat is also a world outside of a castle. Or perhaps I should call it a palace, a lunar palace. Because the lunar palace, where we know the Moon Sisters spent a lot of time, is very likely to be the place where they wove fate from. Now let's take this a step further by making a small assumption. Since the lunar palace, where we know the Moon's palace, a lunar palace. Because the lunar palace, where we know the Moon Sisters spent a lot of time, is very likely to be the place where they wove.
Oh, we knew that's where they spent a lot of time, but is likely where they...
fate from. Now let's take this a step further by making a small assumption. Since the lunar palace is likely the place where stories were written, then perhaps we should think of it as a mind palace, also known as a memory palace, memory space, or memory journey. Now, the concept of a mind palace is actually part of a memory enhancement technique that's called the method of loci.
All right. break this down a little bit more. Oh, here we go. We get to learn how to use the method of a loci. Technique for memorizing information by placing a mnemonic image for each item to be remembered at a point along an imaginary journey. The information can then be recalled in a specific order by mentally walking through the same route through the imaginary journey and converting the mnemonic images back into the facts to represent. Loci is plural for the Latin words locus, meaning place or location. What? Memory craft and memory code. I'll create the locations. Create a mental journey along a well-known route, for example, through your house. The first 10 loci or locations of your journey might be your bedroom. Okay. These 10 locations are your first memory place. You will always travel through your memory place in the same order. Memorize the items and take a list of 10 items you want to memorize and imagine each item in one locus or location of your memory palace. For example, you could try memorizing the following shopping list. All right, so you associate it with that location. So it's like, oh, when I see my bed, oh, I think corn. Oh, and now I see, or yeah, as I'm walking through, okay, the closet is milk. So every time you think of that location, you think of this, because you're directly associating it with that place. Okay. Dude, what movie did this? What movie did this? You know, I started playing America server only for you. What? Why? What did you play on before? Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone? No, bro. It wasn't Harry Potter, man. There was a movie. Maybe it was a No, that's a... Maybe it was Sherlock the Show with Benedict Cucumber, whatever the hell his name is. I did watch that show. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Was it Sherlock? It could have been Sherlock. This is the one with Benedict Cucumber, whatever the hell his name is. Right? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Why does it say 2010 to 2017? Wait, what? It's a movie? No, episodes. I think he had... Yeah. I think that's what I'm thinking of. I know it was on something. And it had to have been that, because... otherwise, if I look up this movie... What if I look up like Memory Palace movie? Okay, I mean, come on, people. No. Limitless? Oh. It wasn't that, it's not Inception, is it? Is Inception the one with the dreams? Yeah, Inception's the one with the dreams. Yo, Radish. Your mom invited me over for Christmas, brother. And you know what I gave her? I gave her fucking 8 inches of pipe, brother. So why don't you check yourself, buddy?
The method basically involves imagining a physical space like the layout of a building. This is the Mind Palace. After you've done that, you condense something you want to remember into the shape of a recognizable object, like a souvenir, and then you place that object somewhere in the palace. By using spatial recognition, you can then walk through the Mind Palace to quickly locate specific memories. And can I just say that this concept makes me really
She didn't invite you because I was too busy piping her down, brother. She didn't want you to witness her limping around the house.
Suspicious of the fact that the traveler is collecting souvenirs from all these parts of their journey.
The crazier part is that your dad watched.
And it kind of recontextualizes the rarity level that's been ascribed to them. Because, like, the 5-star ones, the gold ones...
Okay, we can skip this part because we already... Yeah. So the Memory Palace whole thing... Yo,
At the end of Act 6, Columbina escapes Dottore by falling into her own moon gate, and then she vanishes, which raises a very interesting question.
Hit me up on Discord
Where
later.
does
I'll
this
show
moon
you.
gate
I'll show you
lead?
8
Now, in a
plus
previous
some.
video, I said that the moon gate should go to the moon, and that should be the case. All of the evidence that we have points to that, except it might not have gone to the physical moon. And yeah, I mean, that makes sense since, you know, Columbina could have just walked through her own moon gate to get to the moon instead of going through all this trouble with the Hyperborean ritual and whatnot. But, you know, when I was thinking about this, I was just like, well, maybe she just lacked the power necessary to complete the trip. Maybe she can only open the moon gate to warp short distances. She has been really weak and low on Kuvaki lately. But at the end of the quest, the traveler and the quest description says that Columbina actually fell into the moon's reflection. And incidentally, the moon's reflection is also where the iridescent moon fled to after her remains fell to Conria, and it's what allowed her to stay lucid for so long. But if the moon gate is supposed to go to the moon but doesn't actually take you to the physical moon, then is it possible that the moon gate actually takes you to the lunar palace? Because, like, if the lunar palace is a shared mind palace, then it's not...
What do we think of, like, a moon's reflection? Like, it takes you to the moon's reflection, but what is that?
Subject to the laws of time within Teyvat, so it could explain how the iridescent moon survived so long. And then in Natlan, we learned that the Night King...
And then we say, like, the lunar palace is where it went to survive. But then it's outside of the palace. Start playing for you and you ignore me? Brother, I asked where you played before, man. And if you delete your account, hold up, don't delete it, brother. Did you pull any C6 characters? You don't have to delete it. Hold on now, hold on, brother. You don't have to delete it, you know? If you pulled on that account, you know what I mean? Don't delete it. Don't delete it. Just send me that info, brother. I'll keep it nice and warm for you.
To explain how the iridescent moon survived so long. And then in Natlan, we learned that the Night Kingdom, where all Natlan's memories were stored, was a reflection of Natlan. And the light of the moon is merely the light that's reflected from the sun. And if the original sun was Nibelung, then the power of the moon is the reflected power of the sun. So that would make the moon's reflection the story of the moons, or the place where the moons go to tell their stories and use their writing powers. So
reflection is a place where the moons go to use their writing powers.
my hypothesis is that Columbina is currently in the process of pulling a Durin and becoming the author of her own story. And what's funny is that in hindsight, Columbina actually says this straight up multiple times. She calls the moon, quote, the home where her story is written. And she even says her, quote, prologue lies beyond the false skies. What an intriguing choice of words in light of all this new context.
I mean, yeah, but she didn't know that. Like, I believe she genuinely thought that she was going to the Frost Moon to understand things. But there could have been like a sense of the story where she felt like she had to go there, but she was never going to get there. And it's just like, it was always her destiny to get there, but really her destiny was to get to the Lunar Palace. But she just didn't know it. Like it's a prophecy. It's the prophecy to get to the moon, but the prophecy isn't actually to get to the moon. The prophecy is just to get to the Lunar Palace. You know what I mean? Like, it may not have been like clearly defined before that, like, oh, I'm destined to go to the moon. Like, no, that's not where I have to go. But she thought it was. She misinterpreted the prophecy, basically.
And if I'm right about the moon's reflection going to the Lunar Palace, which is like a mind palace for the moon goddesses, then there's actually a very easy to explain scenario where Columbina could go to the Lunar Palace and meet the other three moons in the Lunar Palace, because that space exists outside the story, outside the boundaries of time and causality. She could exchange information with the other moons because we know they met thanks to these lines from the iridescent moon. Now, I'm just extrapolating and speculating here, but I think that within the confines of the Lunar Palace, Columbina might be able to realize that she, much like Durin, could graft herself to an existing story within Teyvat. Namely, the story of the fourth moon that never rose into the sky and instead became the island of Nod Cry.
But then how does this explain, if you're 11, you have to delete your account, brother. You are not allowed until you're 13.
Fourth moon that never rose into the sky and instead...
But then how does this explain what the Welkin moon is? I don't get it. Like, okay, we have this fourth moon that's crashed in, but then what is the Welkin moon?
It became the island of Nod Cry.
Unless it's the fusion of all the moons.
I think she could have then taken advantage of Isla, the last archpriestess of the Frost Moon Scions, because Isla was not only the one who witnessed Columbina's birth, but she also was the one who foresaw it, because she apparently had the ability to see through time. Or did she?
Also, if you're 11, I know for a fact you don't have any C6 characters, so why don't you go ahead and hit that fucking delete button then, buddy?
Because the circumstances of her getting this power are really, really strange, because she's supposed to have gotten it after killing her grandmother, Lovia. The problem is, Lovia wasn't a real Frost Moon Scion. She was weirdly coincidental timing happening here. Because Isla's ability to see through time seems to be an awful lot like the phantom phenomenon that's caused by the trilunar syzygy. So what if it was Columbina who gave Isla the vision of her own birth? Could she not have planted a small seed of knowledge within Isla's mind, and that seed of inspiration created a chain reaction that resulted in the Pillar of Embla reactivating and printing Columbina, who remembered nothing because she only had just entered the story at that time when she was born? And if that sounds familiar,
you made it.
It's probably
Hey, look, here's the thing, buddy. You made it for me, I could tell you what to do with it. Press the delete button.
And printing Columbina, who remembered nothing because she only had just entered the story at that time when she was born? And if that sounds familiar, it's probably because this happened to the Abyss Twin too, with Conria. They woke up without their memories too at the beginning of their story. Now this could explain some of the time travel-y weirdness, but there are some things that remain.
But the thing is with this is, why is there such a big gap? Why is there still such a big gap between when the Moon Sisters blew up or stopped existing and now? And even to when Columbina was reprinted? Why would there still be such a huge gap? Unless she found something else out. Like, there had to have been a huge gap. Like, it had to come to this at this time 500 years ago. Like, she goes back, or well, they meet at this place, they talk. They decide, okay, we're going to do this 500 years prior to this traveler coming, around the time of the Cataclysm. Why then? Why do they still pick then?
Unsolved here. But to explain those, I'm going to reference a couple of pretty popular theories. So the first theory is this one that's written by Koi and my friend Leah, there's a link below, and they argue that Columbina must have entered a fifth dimension through her moon gate, kind of like in the movie Interstellar, which then allowed her to transcend time and mess with the past. Specifically, they're arguing that Columbina must have been the one responsible for pointing out the right books in the library, erecting the shield over Hisi Island during the fight with Rerir, and also naming herself in the past. Now, being the staunch time travel hater that I am, I was initially not very enthusiastic about this idea, and yet, somehow, I ended up in the exact same place, but with the Mind Palace solution in place of the whole fifth dimension thing.
So this is the part where I could see Luana Tar playing an actual role. Maybe Luana Tar isn't the actual, like, it's not as though Luana Tar is going to turn into Columbina, right? But if Luana Tar, we can say, is like a blessing of their meeting, basically, back, or, well, whenever they meet and talk. You can't even say back in time, but, like, that meeting, Luana Tar is then formed. And then Luana Tar is this being that's like helping push certain things along because it has these like memories of things that are supposed to, or there's knowledge of things that are supposed to happen. If the moons are still writers back or when they meet, we have to assume they have the power to write when Columbina still meets with them. Right? So they could have written Luanatar in to be that thing to help, that blessing, bless Luanatar to help this person when this person comes along, and this person being us. So it's not as though Luanatar equals Columbina, it's just Luanatar is this blessing that helps push us in the right direction to result in whatever's about to come.
And I also agree with the two of them that Columbina is likely the one who's responsible for these things and probably some more stuff that we don't even know about.
Responsible by telling them to create this being Luanatar to help guide us along. Possibly.
However, unlike Koi and Leah, who can just say, hey, time travel to change the past, I can't do that because of all the things I've laid out in this video so far. My whole thesis relies on the condition that you cannot change the past because it breaks the rules of causality. So how can Columbina be responsible for all these things without breaking causality? That is the real question. And I think Roosevelt might have gotten the answer right when she suggested that Luanatar was responsible for all of this. Now, Roosevelt does argue that Luanatar is actually Columbina, but like the Columbina from the past, partially because she's way too special looking for a Kuhenki, and she's also far too affectionate to not be Columbina. You should watch her whole video for the full thesis, though. I'm obviously not doing it justice here. But while I am on board with Luanatar being responsible for a lot of these things, at least in part, I'm not really on board with the idea that she is Columbina, partly because she often has these moments of confusion that are completely out of character for the Moon Maiden, and Luanatar isn't technically that unique. She's actually just a type of Kuhenki that's had thousands of years to mature. Also, Columbina even says that this particular Luanatar that we've been following this whole time was not one that was born of her blessing, so it had to come from somewhere else. Now that said,
which, that's where Cat Blue has said it could be the blessings of the other three, which she then follows up on here.
Nicole says that Columbina's birth and nod cry was the dying wish of the previous moon goddesses, and we know that these Kuhenki take thousands of years to form, and the moons died like, what, 6,000 years ago? So there is a possible scenario where Columbina travels to the Lunar Palace, where she could meet the lingering consciousnesses of the moon goddesses.
But why does it have to be the lingering consciousnesses? Like, we have to assume they have some power to right steal, and if it's a lingering consciousnesses, then none of this actually happens, right? Like, if it's just the lingering consciousnesses, then how would they have the power to write or do anything to help us?
We know from the iridescent moon's words that they were a bit confused as to why she showed up or what her purpose was, but they did seem to understand who she was and what her existence could mean. So is it possible?
And it still said all those years ago. This thing, the Crimson Moon Marrow, still said all those years ago. So that kind of throws us through a loop too. What does it mean by all those years ago? Shit, that's actually kind of important, though. Why would it say all those years ago? Unless, when they're meeting, it's the moon goddesses in, like, their pre-destroyed forms. So for them, it was all those years ago. But for Columbina, it's not. And also, how are we going to mention the moon portals again, but then not talk about where did everything still stay the same from your previous thoughts of moon gates? No update on Rear? No update on Thalindus?
Who she was and what her existence could mean. So is it possible that the moon goddesses at the time of their death took a gamble and left behind a wish or a legend or a prophecy that one day a fourth moon could be born into?
Now,
that because
yes, that I'm on board with. I'm on board with that 100%. But in order for that to happen, it had to have been when they had the power to do that. And the fragments of their consciousnesses is not the time for them to do that.
If so, then perhaps Luanatar and all the other Kuhenki were born of that same wish and were responsible for caring for Columbina in place of her dead sisters. And if I'm right about this scenario, then maybe Luonatar knew the Traveler because Columbina told the moon goddesses about them, and they told Luonatar, which is why she recognized them right away and knew what to do. And maybe she was also told to protect Hisi Island and received a special power to do so. Both Seelies and the moons are very gifted in the skill of prophecy. Who's to say they didn't foresee all of this? And this could explain why Luonatar is weirdly helpful sometimes, but not all the time. Now, the best part of this scenario for me is that the fourth moon already existed as Nod Cry, so the moons didn't need to break causality to make this happen.
See, and then again here, they have the power. The fourth moon already existed as Nod Cry. That wouldn't be the case if they're discussing this back when the moons were, well, I guess we don't know. No, it had to have been, because the moons were in full form before that war, and that war is what led to the fourth moon. Well, I guess we don't know that, do we? Do we know when the fourth moon supposedly came down and created Nod Cry? I thought it was after the war, or like during the War of Funerary Flame. I could be wrong on that, though. I'm not 100%. But I'm pretty sure it was. So in that case, Nod Cry wouldn't have been created then. If we assume that she had to go back to a time when the moons were in full form, not captured, no primordial one. I guess you could possibly have it be why the primordial one is here, but not if he pressed publish, securing to her theory. We can assume that according to her, he came, pressed publish, and they stopped writing. They just lived in peace. They lived side by side, but they weren't writing anymore. So in that case, they wouldn't have been able to write in a prophecy. So if they are meeting at the Lunar Palace, it had to have been at a time when they had full form, full control, full ability to write.
All they needed to do was plant the seed of an idea within the story.
And Nod Cry wouldn't have existed. Fourth moon, I don't think... Nod Cry. Nod Cry is a remnant of the fourth moon that failed to materialize. I don't know if we have a timeline on this end. I don't know if we have a time when that was. I'm gonna say no. That it wasn't. When they had power. When the three moons had the power, basically before Primordial one came.
They imbued the fourth moon's existence with a new meaning.
But that could be still true. What she's saying, imbuing the fourth moon with a new meaning, it could be that the fourth moon only became a thought after Columbina met with them in the Lunar Palace, right? They met. They're like, oh my god, contingency plan. We'll make a fourth moon. We'll make a fourth moon with blessings from us. And then we can make it rise. And it'll be like a contingency plan type of thing or whatever. Because we know Columbina knows, obviously, that Nod Cry is made up of a broken fourth moon. So she's going back with the knowledge of this stuff going back with the knowledge that this stuff happened. The knowledge that we can assume that the Moon Sisters don't know. Because all of this happened after they stopped writing. So they technically don't know any of this because this isn't in the stuff that they wrote, we can assume. Right? I don't know how that would work. I don't know if we can assume that. I don't know if we can assume that. Although we probably can. I don't know. I don't know about that part. I don't know if we can assume that they wouldn't have known Nod cried. Well, yeah, we kind of can, because if she was born out of this fourth moon, she meets with them in the lunar palace to speak about her own existence. She's kind of creating herself. She's telling them, we can assume that she's kind of creating herself. She's telling them, hey, I come from this remnants of the fourth moon place I got spawned in 500 years ago. There's these creatures that float around and do all this. She's basically relaying to them the information that exists to us but may not exist to them yet. So they end up writing it into existence, and they're like, oh yeah. Maybe they try to make it so it doesn't break again or something. They're like, okay, we're gonna make this fourth moon. It's gonna work this time. Like, we'll fix it. But then it still always ends up crashing down. You know what I mean? Like, I still feel like there's some type of, there's a loop here involved. No matter what it is, there's a loop that Columbina is writing herself. Columbina is creating herself every single time. And we're here now to break that loop, that cycle, or progress that cycle forward. So it's her, whether it is her going back in time, which is probably not going to happen, but her talking to them in this lunar palace that ends up creating herself, but ends up in the same destruction that's been happening for however long. And they're stuck in this enclosed loop here.
Once enough time had passed, that idea within that seed would take root and sprout. And thus, Columbina would be born from an idea. And this is almost exact.
But right, it's true. She's born from the idea, but the idea has to be before Nod Cry even existed. Like, her seed is implanted into this fourth moon that they may have the thought that it can rise up and be born, but it always ends up crashing down. They're not putting this seed of the thought of Columbina into an already broken fourth moon. I don't think, unless there's, because I can't remember exactly if there's text on when exactly the fourth moon crashed into the ground. But I'm pretty sure that they could have just had hope that, okay, it'll definitely rise up again. But then I don't know how, I still don't know how Welkin Moon comes into play.
What I think happened with A and the sacred Sakura. A Sakura tree likely all.
But I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna leave the rest of what I had before. I just want to revisit this part because there was a lot going on all at once here, and I wanted to read over this part again because I had thoughts throughout the whole thing, but I wanted to let her get her whole thought out. Sheesh, dude. Hey, look, we don't have much longer to wait till Luna 4, Luna 3, Luna 4, Luna 4. Dude, the live stream is at 12 a.m. this Friday. The live stream is this Friday. Dude, I feel like we just beat this quest yesterday. You know what I mean? So we got some info coming, brothers. We got some info coming. She had another video too, but I don't think. Celestial Hierarchy. I didn't watch this.
Yeah, I am so right. That kind of actually how it goes, but for the sake of the visuals, I'm going with it. So that we know of as angelic or right. Koitar in particular.
Oh, this, I love graphs. Ooh, this might be good. Do I want to watch this now? Wait, what did she have at the top? Oh, hold up. Wait, is this where she talks about Alice? Where does she got Alice on this thing? Where's Alice on this? Shades. Oh. Moons. Where's she got? Oh, this one's... Oh, wait, I saw her. I saw her. I saw Alice. Yeah. Yeah, they're kind of insane, aren't they? I don't even know what to do with these guys. I gotta open up a motherfucking daycare or something, bro. I mean, the dude did say he's 11. I mean, he's not even old enough to have an account type shit, you know what I mean? Let alone play Genshin Impact. I mean, Jesus. Bro, there's no way, unless you're you have to have a pretty good reading level to, like, get through Genshin and appreciate the story. You know what I mean? Like, there's no point in playing this at 11 years old because you probably don't even understand, and you probably won't be able to understand what the hell's going on. I mean, Jesus, even people with higher reading levels, like, this game is fucking crazy. Do we want to watch this now? Do we just say screw it and send it? You know what? Let's watch it. Let's watch it. I'm curious. I was gonna watch this before I left, but I didn't, and I like graphs. So we're just gonna chill. Let's chill. Let's chill. Tevat's Celestial Hierarchy. Plus, I want to see where she's putting Alice on this thing, because I've been looking for the answer to Alice, or somebody else will talk about Alice, and this I might have, it might be in here. So we got to see. Ashikai video number 2, let's go.
So I've had this theory since the early days of Inazuma that all non-human species in Teyvat share a lineage, and thanks to recent information from Columbina and Nicole, I can make a compelling case for this. Nearly 4 years after I had the initial idea. I am so fast. But see, the characteristics of these two lovely ladies strongly suggest that every non-human species in Teyvat can be classified as a type of angel. Now, obviously, I will be making a case for this later in the video, but that's not the only thing I want to do today, because if all non-humans of Teyvat are indeed angelic, then I think it's possible we can categorize them into different types of angels, and even into different ranks within a greater hierarchy of heaven.
Actually, hold, let me grab a drink. I need a drink. 1 second. Drink. Get your drinks, get your popcorn, take a piss, lock in. You grab popcorn. You grab popcorn. You grab a snack. Grab Cheez-Its, perhaps. Cheez-Its, perhaps. Cheez-Its, perhaps. I got Cheez-Its on deck, bro. I fucking love Cheez-Its. I fucking love me some Cheez-Its, brother. I love me some Cheez-Its. All right. For real. For real now. Celestial, or just the hierarchy of Teyvat. Let's go. Let's go. Power rankings inbound.
So in this video, I will be making a case for classifying all non-human entities in Teyvat as angels, a process which will involve a sort of a family tree. And then I'm going to be sorting all of them into an angelic hierarchy based on a 5th century book called the Celestial Hierarchy, which was written by Pseudo-Dionysus. No, that's not his real name. No one knows his real name, so don't ask.
Guy?
And because this hierarchy isn't something I'm just making up out of nowhere, I'm also going to need to explain how this hierarchy works. So the final product is gonna look something like a tier list, and it'll probably be the only tier list I ever
Dude,
make
I love
on
graphs.
this channel, so savor it.
Hey, Ashikai, if you ever see this, and I just have one request. I have one request. In your videos, put more graphs. Look, I don't know about you, I'm a like visual person. Audio, I gotta listen through like maybe twice, but if I see it visually, I'm like locked like that. You know what I mean? Like insta locked, like it makes sense instantly,
But before we get into that, I must recognize that some of you might be interested in procuring some more of these playable angels for yourself. So allow me to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, Eniba, a top-tier one-stop top-up shop fulfilling all of your primo gem needs. But Ash, I hear you say, there are a lot of top-up shops out there already.
Look, I have my own opinions about top-up shops, but since I'm watching her video, I'm just gonna, you know, we're just gonna, yep.
But for sponsoring this video, and now we're gonna get back to the video
I have
and
my own
kick things
opinions
off
about
by
those, but it's
explaining
fine.
why everything into that is angels. And we're also gonna be fleshing out this bizarre family tree while we're at it. Like I said in the intro, I've had this idea for a very long time, but struggled with gathering enough evidence to justify my vibes. Because, like, my vibes back in version 2 were mostly based on the fact that Seelies were associated with angelic things like the Hall of Angels, but they were named after Scottish fairies. And despite the fact that they look nothing alike, I've always associated Seelies with crystal flies. Because crystal flies are basically fancy crystalline butterflies. And, like, throughout my childhood, fairies were always associated with insects and were often depicted with, like, having butterfly wings. So my neurons just kept connecting crystal flies to Seelies without anything substantial in-game to back it up. And also, the me from back then was looking at the Adepti and the Yokai like, these guys are kind of like based on little spirits, right? And that kind of sounds like a type of fairy, or at least a fae, to me. And then we got to Sumeru, where we learned about the Jinn, who were born from flowers that sprouted from a Seelie's blood, and that also sounded like fairies, because fairies are often born of flowers. And then we learned that the Jinn were placed into machines, and then they were granted a power core that looks just like a crystal fly core, which didn't help this conspiracy in my brain. And I don't even think I need to mention how similar Oceanids look when compared to Seelies, or even to Thundering Manifestations, because I was also counting them in this equation, partly because Oceanids are also called pure water elves in Chinese, and elves are originally part of the Fae alongside the fairies. But this all came to a head later on when Xianyin came out and confirmed that races like the Adepti, or at least the non-human ones of the Adepti, manifest directly from the elements themselves. While it didn't really help my whole angels and fairies are the same sort of thing, and also the Adepti and the Yokai and the Oceanids are the same kind of thing agenda, it did kind of help me lump them into a singular lineage. They were all elemental beings, so they must be connected somehow. And now we have Nicole, who came along and declared herself one of the original Seelies, while also wearing accessories that look like crystal flies. And at this point, I think I'm going a little bit nuts. But it did kind of help me solidify this idea that fairies are angels, which is neat and helpful. Especially because I can now link fairies and crystal flies to the demon gods, because demons are just fallen angels and Seelies are quite literally declared angels in-game. I love the confirmation. But there was still one thing that bothered me, and it's this line from Breeze Amidst the Forest, which reads, "Typically, when life arises from the elements, it either descends and becomes a slime or ascends and becomes a crystal fly. Rarely does this process give rise to dangerous elemental monsters. Elemental dragons are rarely seen and have the powers to match the gods of old." Which directly links this process of life arising from the elements to become a crystal fly or fairy, or even a dragon, which means that dragons are in theory one of the Fae, and therefore also angels, which checks out, because like, look at Columbina. She looks like an angel, but is actually a moon goddess, and the moons were made by the Dragon King Nibelung, who was from the light realm, aka the elemental realm, and all of these angelic or fae-like eldritch, which means elf-like beings, are born of the elements. Ergo, everything is angel, and everything is also dragon, because dragons are angels. If all of that was a little bit too messy and hard to follow for you,
I like calling everything, let's just call everything is a dragon instead of everything is an angel. I think that's cooler.
Don't worry, I'm gonna walk you through a mostly complete chart of the angelic genealogy, which should
clarify
a lot of things. Okay, let's begin. So the Dragon King Nibelung was born alongside the world of Tevat and is responsible for the creation of dragonkind, which were the first life forms on the planet as far as we know, and that makes him the original god of the world.
Okay, real shit, at this point in the story of Genshin, what are the odds that we find out at some point Nibelung isn't the original? I say chances are like 70-30 at this point. 74 finding out Nibelung isn't the OG. Something's gonna come along and drop that like something was before this guy, and I mean, maybe not. Maybe it'll be after the main story. And I've been talking about a lot of things that may come after the main story nowadays, like Sir Logi, for example, probably will return after the main story, I feel like. But I think maybe we might get some, you know, pre-Nibelung after the whole main story is over.
And a god born of the light realm, which is what he is, also makes him the father of lights, which is what the celestial hierarchy calls the god. Like the one god, the only Abrahamic god that there is. So I think this comparison checks out. So the original god of the world, Nibelung, used his will to create the 3 moon goddesses, Arya, Sonnet, and Canon. Now there is an intermediary step here that I had to add because as far as we know, the moons appear to be a little bit younger than the rest of the dragons. So primordial energies like phlogiston and the primordial sea should predate them to some degree. But they also seem to be directly connected to the moon's power of Kuvaki. Now, I have gone into depth on how I think the mechanics of this work, but for the purposes of today's video, I have made the assumption that Nibelung made Kuvaki first, which was then split into phlogiston and primordial seawater, and then also used to fashion the moons directly. I don't know if that's actually how it goes, but for the sake of the visuals, I'm going with it. So these moon spirits were called Arya, Sonnet, and Canon, and they governed the eternal, iridescent, and frost moon, respectively. Do note that we only know for certain that Arya was the eternal moon. The assignments of iridescent Sonnet and frost moon Canon are assumptions that I'm making based on the fact that Solnari appears to be another name for Sonnet, and Rerir was the Rasher of Solnari, or the hunter of the crimson moon. And remember that the crimson moon is the iridescent moon. So Sonnet kind of has to be the iridescent moon, and that leaves Canon as the frost moon. Again, not confirmed in game.
Not confirmed.
Just making a rational assumption. Now, Columbina is also a moon goddess, but she was not part of this original creation process, and thus not made by Nibelung, so I've marked her down as being born of the frost moon. Although that's not totally accurate, as she doesn't really appear to be a reincarnation or replacement for the frost moon, despite being...
You also had her listed as Welkin Moon,
the goddess worshipped by the Frost Moon Scions. Instead, she's confirmed to be the Welkin Moon. Give her $5 a month and she gives you primos. So as far as we can tell, she wasn't made by Nibelung, but instead born from a wish made by the other moons. So that's why she's depicted as the child of the Frost Moon here.
Where is this confirmed? All we have is Homecoming of the Welkin Moon on our thing.
Incidentally, this might mean that Columbina is actually the sister of Andreas, since the wolves are children of the moon. I don't know if that's metaphorical or literal, but I'm gonna take it as literal because I think it's funny. Okay, so adjacent to the moons, we have the other creations of Nibelung, the dragon sovereigns. While technically elemental in nature, while they manifest onto that, they appear to have been born from more primordial forms of elements, so I have them branching off of Kuvaki because Kuvaki would be split into the modern elements later on by the heavenly principles. Now, we don't know a whole lot about the followers of the dragons, apart from Shui-Coatl, who fashioned his dragon lords from phlogiston and seems to have split Kukulkan from himself. And that all seems to have spiraled down into the Saurians, who should have some sort of shared parentage here, but also a weaker connection to the primordial elements, which makes them less divine and more mortal. This is arguably the same situation the Baptismal Bishops are in, although their connection is to the primordial sea instead. Geo-Bishops too, although I don't know what primordial power they would be of because we just don't have one in Liyue, or at least not one that we know of. But Baptismal Bishops aren't the only dragons on the side of the primordial sea in Nouvelette. We also have Scylla, or Skyla. I still don't know how to say his name. By token of his title of Dragon Prince, we can assume that he was probably on the same level as a Dragon Lord, but you know, primordial sea style instead of phlogiston style. So unfortunately, that's mostly it for Nibelung's known offspring. So now we can introduce the heavenly principles, the new god of Tevat, because they are the progenitor of a whole separate line of angelic entities. Although I do want to point out before we continue that, despite the fact that I am considering this a separate lineage altogether, the heavenly principles didn't just make things from their own power. As far as we know, a lot of the stuff that they made was fashioned from Nibelung's remnants.
No, they fucking ripped it. Which still doesn't make sense. If they ripped all of this, how were they more powerful than the moons? Like, how did the moon stand no chance against the sky? That's what doesn't make sense.
Kuvaki, the primordial sea, and phlogiston, and that kind of stuff. So in a way, you could say that both Nibelung and the heavenly principles are the parents of this particular lineage. Which is again why everything is both angel and dragon. Okay, so the heavenly principles is credited with creating the 4 shades, Istaroth, Asmodee, Renova, and Naberius, although we're not really sure how. Perhaps they used their own will like Nibelung did, or perhaps they fashioned them from Kuvaki. I don't know. That does seem to be the most likely for me, especially since I actually think Istaroth might be a former moon, but that's a separate theory. But from the shades, we really only have one clearly defined lineage extending down from Naberius. That said, as the shade of life, Naberius should be responsible for creating a lot of different life forms into that, but there's only one that we know of as angelic or, somewhat heavenly, and that's Egeria, who Naberius created to take Nuvalet's place in the primordial sea. Now, there's hints about her creation being similar to that of a dragon, so I've kind of laid out Egeria's parentage as being of both Naberius and the primordial sea. And from Egeria allegedly came the Oceanids, like Rhodea and Focalor, the latter of which split herself in two to create the mortal we know of as Farina. So somehow this angelic lineage ended in a human. Now look, technically we can make the argument that there is a second lineage here that extends off of Istaroth, because Venti was a fragment of her thousand winds, and Zebai is apparently sometimes called Istaroth's daughter. However, Zebai is called a Seelie specifically, and although Seelies are angels alongside everything else in this chart, they're angels of a very specific lineage. The ones we call Seelies were created when the heavenly principles gave shape to moonlight, meaning the Seelies should be born of a union between the heavenly principles and the moons. And frankly, I don't really know what Venti's real deal is, so I'm going to ignore him. Noteworthy and confirmed Seelies include Koitar, Nabu Malikata, Sibylla, Nicole, Yahalt-Takutin, and Zebai, and several of them are parents in their own right. Koitar in particular created the Snowland Fae, at least partially from the light of the Frost Moon, while Yahalt-Takutin created the Wayab spirits. Nabu Malikata created the flowers from her blood that blossomed into the Jinn, and then later fashioned a phoenix-like bird called the Simurgh from her own divine power, who then later dove into Egeria's remains and created the Pari. All of the angels I just mentioned were born from primordial powers which end up looking like the elements, but the elements were actually created separately from all of this when the heavenly principles split the white light of Kuvaki into 7 colors. Life arising from these colors or elements could evolve in 3 main ways. If they attained sentience, they would turn into something like Xiao, Xianyan, or Yaimiko. If no sentience developed, then the result would be a lower spirit like a crystal fly, or other elemental life forms like a slime or a hydrophantasm. This process seems to be currently influenced by the heavenly principles if the description for the lava dragon statue is anything to go by, because the lava dragon statue was an attempt to make a new race based on humans, but the heavenvenly principles restricted its ability to gain sentience, which is kind of similar to what probably happens to slimes. And that's basically the entire genealogy.
Well, they have to be somewhat sentient. We can't just call them completely brain dead, right? Because they attack us on sight, so they gotta, I mean, what the hell's up with that? They gotta have something going on in there. Well, how do we define sentient? Able to perceive or feel things. I mean, they move. In order to move, you have to be able to feel, right? I mean, I don't know. I could say that slimes are kind of sentient. Same with crystal flies. I mean, they fly away from us when we get close. So
notice that a few things are missing from this list, like many of the Archons and the Aranara. I didn't include the Archons because most of them have obscured parentage, with the exception of Farina and all of the Pyro Archons, who, unlike Farina, were born human and therefore do not belong on this list. Some Archons may have manifested from the elements, but others might be from other races, like Seelies, Shades, or even the Snowland Fae. Or maybe even a Dragon Sovereign lineage. It's really hard to say right now. But then we have like Rukkhadevata, who we do know the lineage of. She's an avatar of Irminsul, so she was born from Irminsul. But the problem is that we don't know where Irminsul came from, so I just don't have any idea where to put it on this map. Which also means that the Aranara she made are not on this map either. So, sorry about that. Now, before we move on to talking about the angelic hierarchy, because I am done with this bizarre family tree, I do want to point out the fact that aside from dragons, archons, and shades, and the moons, nearly every other human-shaped angel or angelic being can and often does possess a vision or a moon wheel, because the two are interchangeable. But this paints Venti's statement about how humans who possess a vision can become gods in a new light, because it's basically saying that humans with a vision can become angels. This is something that is possible in Abrahamic Gnostic and Gnostic literature, and that also means that humans should appear somewhere on this lineage map as like mortal angels at some point. Kind of like the Pyro Archons. They ascended from humanhood to archonhood. That's not a good way to say that, but whatever. It's also very likely that mortal dragons like Saurians and Bishops also have a vision-like equivalent, but that it just stays inside of them. I've actually made a couple of theories about this, which you can check out if you want to learn more about why I say this. But for the purposes of ranking, I am not going to include any mortals on this list, except for Farina. Just know that mortals can move into the hierarchy, but they are not currently part of that hierarchy.
That wasn't our guy. That was the end of the
hierarchy normally. So with that in mind, let me move on to explain how the celestial hierarchy of Pseudo-Dionysus works.
Okay,
like I said in the intro, the primary source I'm going to be using to sort angels into ranks is the Celestial Hierarchy by Pseudo-Dionysus. Not only is this book one of the most comprehensive pieces of Christian angelology in existence, it is also the one that seems to fit the most closely with the patterns that I see in Genshin's pantheon. But I'm also going to be pulling from works of St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote about this extensively, as well as some Gnostic works, because while Nibelung's half of the genealogy looks to be quite biblical, the Heavenly Principles portion appears to be a little bit more Gnostic. Which is still biblical, but it's like Bible stuff with spice. There will be links where you can read these works in the description if you wanna, but they are not a prerequisite since I am going to explain how this Dionysian system works right now. The angelic hierarchy is split into 3 ranks, also known as orders, each of which contains 3 types of angelic beings referred to as choirs. In this system, angels are not ordered by strength, but are instead grouped together based on their responsibilities and general domain of influence. For example, angels of the first order concern themselves with the affairs of heaven itself and their service to God, while angels of the third order concern themselves with the affairs of the earth, leaving the angels of the second order to act as a sort of intermediary body that handles the communications and relationships between heaven and earth, and also the first and third orders. In addition to this, each choir within an angelic order appears to correspond to the themes of structure, knowledge, and action, respectively. Now, technically speaking, structure here is supposed to be divine order, but since each category of angels is called an order, I thought the original name would be a little bit too confusing, so structure it is. Now, while there isn't necessarily a division of strength between the angelic orders, there is a division of knowledge and influence. Angels of the highest order have the greatest access to universal knowledge due to their close proximity with God, and thus they also have authoritative control over the domains of the lower orders. Likewise, the second order has more knowledge and influence than the third order, but less knowledge and influence than the first, again, due to their position relative to heaven. This is a pretty common setup regardless of the system of hierarchy that you're referencing, because higher angelic or demonic entities essentially always emanate downwards to lesser entities who occupy the sublunary sphere, and the shape that they take while in the mortal realm does vary quite a bit. Also important to note that the angelic rankings are not limited to lineage. Lineage kind of determines the starting rank, but it is possible, although uncommon, to move between the ranks. It's like doing a career swap. So yeah, that's basically how the system works in a nutshell. Next, we're going to go into more detail about each order's responsibilities while also sorting Genshin's non-human species into their respective ranks.
This is a learning video.
I need to first make one minor adjustment to the Dionysian system. That is to say, I need to add a 4th, or rather 0th rank for God. This isn't necessary for the Dionysian system, typically, because that system only accounts for a single god. But Genshin isn't just looking at its celestial hierarchy through a Christian lens, it's also accounting for Gnostic influences. In other words, multiple gods. So as we established, the original, true, Abrahamic-style god of Tevat should be the Dragon King Nibelung, since he was born alongside the planet and was the progenitor of the original species that propagated that world. He's also the dragon born of the Light Realm, whom the other dragons refer to as the Father or Formidable Father, which is in line with how Dionysus refers to God as the Father of Lights, so I think calling Nibelung the true god is fair and—
Shoot, hang on. Un momento. My computer got filled. I forgot to clear this out after the other day. And I'm out of space. I gotta delete something. Give me 1 minute. Give me 1 second. 1 second, please. 12:13. Uno momento. Shit, 12:13. Okay, I can delete it. Hold on. Hold on. Delete. Well, I looked over and I saw the red gone. I thought thing cut off completely. I was like, what the hell just happened? But nah, it's just my recording. It's just my recording. Recycle bin. Oh my god, what is all this from? Oh my lord. Oh, okay, we're good. We're good, we're good, we're good. We're good. Record. Okay. Feel like we need to learn Dante's Divine Comedy to understand the angel shit in this video? No, brother, she listed off the other books. I guarantee they're down here. Well, they're not. But there's other books.
And justified. That said, Nibelung was defeated by the Heavenly Principles, who now rules Tevat as if they were the true god. This makes the Heavenly Principles a good candidate for the role of the Gnostic Demiurge, or the false god. What's important to note is that the Heavenly Principles has been identified as a being known as a Descender, which is a title that has never been truly clarified for us in-game, but it appears to be a title given to anyone who has the potential to become the ruler of the world, so a new god. And as far as we know, there are only 4 of these, so I am including them in my list here, but only really the Heavenly Principles is relevant for the purposes of this video. Because as far as I know, the other 3 Descenders haven't actually, made any sort of creatures that we need to sort. But just know that I had to make this 0th tier because we have potentially 5.
Wait a minute, that's true, bro. We put a moon marrow in us, right? Why can't we just start making shit, bro? Why couldn't we just, I don't know, make a new 5-star for ourselves if we wanted?
Gods to deal with. But okay, enough with my made up 0th rank. Let's move on to the first angelic order. The first angelic order is made up of the Seraphim, Cherubim, and Ophanim, and primarily concerns itself with the affairs of heaven. These angels command the lower orders and receive directives and knowledge from God directly. Angels of the first order tend to have higher level responsibilities, like weaving fate or overseeing the flow of time. So they don't tend to directly meddle in the affairs of the mortal realm, although they can do that, they just don't. The distribution of these responsibilities is split by choir.
Well, they look down on the peasants.
They don't
interact with the peasants.
Seraphim. Seraphim are the highest angels of the first order and thus embody structure. They're typically described as having 6 wings, 2 of which are covering their eyes, although depending on the source material, they can have up to 12. As the highest ranking of the angels, they carry out God's direct orders and sing sacred hymns. Their name, Seraph, can mean either burning or serpent, which is why they're sometimes called dragons in non-biblical texts, and also why they're so closely associated with fire. But more so than fire, Seraphim are associated with the holy light that fire seems to emit. In fact, they are sometimes referred to as beings made of pure light with a direct connection to God. They're also considered to be the throne bearers of God, and therefore they rarely leave the heavenly realm. They also appear to be synonymous with the Gnostic glories, although those number in the hundreds of thousands, so maybe Kuhenki are being counted here, I don't know. In Genshin, though, the Seraphim are most likely the moon goddesses. They're the angels closest to the original god Nibelung, who was a dragon, and their powers stem from the holy light in the form of Kuvaki, or moonlight. And as goddesses of the moon, they're the most likely to remain in heaven most of the time, or at least most of their work would be carried out there. We can see more similarities between the moon goddesses and the Seraphim in Columbina. Like the Seraphim, she boasts 6 wings and also covers her eyes, and she has a natural inclination for singing. Now, I do wonder if her connection to the hydro element implies a connection to the Chalkydri, or water serpents, who were called the flying elements of the sun, and also frequently associated with the Seraphim. If the sun is Nibelung, since he's the father of lights, then I kind of feel like this checks out, especially since the moons were said to love the stars of daybreak, and the Chalkydri would burst into song to announce the arrival of dawn. Also, as the angels closest to God, the Seraphim most closely reflect his attributes, which also includes his attitude towards life on Earth, or in our case, Tevat. Biblically, this means they are the angels that embody divine love, which checks out because Nibelung loved his little planet and all the life in it. Fitting then that the primary responsibility of the moon goddesses was to protect this planet and all who lived in it, and also that Columbina's chosen constellation takes the shape of a heart. Okay, so moon goddesses are Seraphim, the angels closest to Nibelung. So what about the next choir? The Cherubim. They held a position very close to God, so who are they? Well, I
cherubim.
strongly suspect that Genshin's cherubim are the four shades. Cherubim are messengers of God's will, and often the ones who act in God's stead, a characteristic we certainly see within the shades. They're also associated with the number 4, as they often have 4 wings and 4 faces. And although Genshin's shades don't have 4 wings or 4 wings and 4 faces. And although Genshin's shades don't have 4 wings or 4 faces, there are 4 of them. Also, you can make the argument that each of the 4 shades represents one of the 4 heads of the cherubim. Those heads were supposed to resemble a human, a bird, a beast, and an ox. And if we look at the namesakes of each of the shades, we have Naberius as the bird, Renova as the human, Istaroth as the ox, thanks to Ishtar, and Asmodee as the beast. No, it's not perfect, but it works well enough for me. Cherubim are also considered the angels of knowledge by Pseudo-Dionysus, and thus they embody knowledge, and they're also the keepers of the new covenant. And this is the main reason why I think the cherubim are the shades. Logically speaking, the old or original covenant should have been made with an old...
So does this mean the shades are now seraphim since the moons are fucked? Yeah, I don't know how that would work now. I don't think she's trying to make that point. Because technically the moons are still kind of there. They're just not physically there. But we know their marrows are there. You know what I mean? So it's like, the moons are technically still around. They still exist, you know? They're just not up in the sky to look at and gaze at under the moonlight with your wife.
Older or original god like Nibelung.
At least not all
so
of
if the
them.
cherubim are upholding a new covenant, then they are upholding the covenant of a new god, which in this case should be the heavenly principles, which would then make the cherubim the shades. I will also point out that the shade of
Wait. What was that part? Hold on.
shades. Logically speaking, the old or original covenant should have been made with an older or original god like Nibelung. So if the cherubim are upholding a new covenant, then they are upholding the covenant of a new
Cherubim
god, which
are
in this
upholding
case
a
should
new
be the
covenant.
heavenly principles, which would then make the cherubim the shades. I will also point out that the shade of space...
Well, that's the other thing. But if the function of the moons was replaced by the shades, I don't know how it would work. Well, that's the thing, right? Is we still don't know exactly how the shades got their power. She said that even earlier in this video. It's always nice to hear when she says, oh, we don't know this thing, because then I could be like, okay, I didn't miss something, because I'm assuming that she went through everything, because that's just what she does. You know what I mean? She takes the time to go through everything. Me, on the other hand, I don't. So when I hear her say, oh, no, we don't know this thing, I'm like, oh, good, so we don't know. All right, cool. I'm not crazy. I'm not an idiot. So her saying she doesn't know how the shades got their power. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't know how they got their power yet. We can assume certain things, like that they ripped their power from the moons, or that the heavenly principles just gave him some of his power, assuming he was this powerful being that was somehow able to play the moons, which kind of still doesn't make sense to me. How he's stronger than the moons. I don't see how that's possible. I don't line up. What are you doing, Sticky? Oh my god. Your fucking tail just ruined everything. So yeah, I don't know.
Space, Asmodee, was originally considered a cherub before they became a demon, which makes me giggle because the name cherub is also used for putos, which are small winged children generally recognized as like depictions of or references to Cupid, which is once again really funny because Asmodee was associated with love, or at least cursed love. And it also makes the whole Asmodee to Paimon theory stand out a little bit more, because Paimon would be a little puto in this case. Istaroth is also interesting in this context because her namesake, Astaroth, was once a seraph before their fall. This does make you wonder if this goddess of time was once a moon goddess, one who didn't perish during the War of Funerary Flame. But that's highly speculative. There is more to say about the cherubim, but I think you kind of get the idea. So let's move on and talk about the third choir of
highly speculative, because we know all the marrows were in something, right? So unless she like willingly gave it up and switched sides, that wouldn't really make sense. But then how would it still exist? Because like we had the marrow, Arlecchino had a marrow, Columbina is a marrow.
The first order, the Ophanim. The Ophanim are described as the 4 great wheels connected to God's heavenly throne, which is also a chariot. Now I know what you're thinking. If there are only 4 Ophanim, why aren't they the 4 shades instead? Or maybe you're thinking about how the Ophanim are wheels and that the moons are also wheels and there are technically 4 moons, so why aren't they the Ophanim instead? And it's because Pseudo-Dionysus considers the Ophanim and the choir of the thrones to be the same thing. Now it's actually a good thing to compare the seraphim moon goddesses to the thrones because a wheel in this context could be interpreted to be a coiled serpent, which would link this choir with the dragons rather than the heavenly principles, which means that we're looking down Nibelung's half of the genealogy chart to find our perfect candidate, the 7 dragon sovereigns. Why perfect? Well, Pseudo-Dionysus described the thrones as the foundation of God's authorities, manifestations of God's power, so their main responsibilities included overseeing God's judgments, orders, and records. And that to me sounds a lot like the 7 dragon sovereigns. Not only is each dragon sovereign supposed to possess a divine throne in heaven that encompasses their authority over Tevat, but dragons in general are quite concerned with contracts, records, and of course, divine judgment. I think if you wanted to illustrate the relationship between the choirs of this order, we could do so by looking at a chariot. God would sit in his chariot and decide where he wants to go. His seraphim would act as the drivers of the chariot, so he gives his desired destination to them.
Well, if he's deciding where to go, how are they driving? He's the one driving. Like, the driver decides where to go. You know what I mean? Like, what the hell are we talking about? What the hell are we talking about?
Seraphim then direct the cherubim who are pulling the chariot on which way to go, and the thrones act as the wheels to ensure that the chariot moves according to God's wishes. So the seraphim embody structure by providing directions, the cherubim embody knowledge by knowing how to move the cart in the desired direction, and the thrones embody action by ensuring the cart can move as desired. Which is partly why the heavenly principles did not get rid of the seraphim or the thrones when they took over. They're kind of needed, or at least their powers and authorities are needed. And that wraps up our first order, which was pretty straightforward, all things considered, but it is in the second order where things start to get a little bit messy.
Not the archons. Not the archons. The archons are going to be underneath the sovereigns.
The second order of angels is made up of dominions, virtues, and powers, and they act.
But yeah, because they're not even going to be on this list. But the archons are definitely going to be underneath. Because the dragon sovereigns are the original holders of that elemental power. Like Nubalet outranks Farina, you know what I mean? Obviously. Full alert, you know? He's the...
as a sort of intermediary between the first and third orders. Now, based on our genealogy chart, this order best suits the roles of the Seelies, and also entities like the Dragon Lords. Mostly because the Seelies and the Dragon Lords are pretty close to the first order of heaven, but they also have a lot of say in what goes on in Tevat. This dualistic relationship earns them the moniker of Divine Envoy as they carry messages of the
Archons replace the sovereigns in theory. Yeah, I mean, kinda. In theory. A little bit more than that, but yeah, kind of. That's a base explanation, sure.
higher orders to the lower orders, and also to the mortal realm. But I do think there's an interesting split in responsibilities here, so let's start off with our first choir, the Dominions. Dominions are the choir most concerned with governance and conveying the will of the upper orders. They're essentially the leaders of the lower orders, and they function kind of like a governmental bureaucracy or the upper management of a large company. You can also think of them as stewards, or the ones responsible for the delegation of tasks, which is why we associate them with structure.
Pretty much useless.
This description best fits entities like Sheepwaddle's 13 Dragon Lords, as well as Kukulkan, who were not only stewards of specific regions of Natlan, but also held governmental office and concerned themselves with carrying out the will of their sovereign, who belonged to the First Order. Also, Pseudo-Dionysus refers to dominions as lordships, so it only feels right.
Oh yeah, I got mine here too.
It looks so funny.
Dude, that's actually came in handy.
You just see a little man.
That's cool. Yeah, it's pretty nice. I just want to put a controller on now.
To assign dragon lords to this choir. And I know a prince isn't technically a lord, but a prince is still a pretty elevated title, so I think we should also count Scylla, Skyla, or Scylla, however you say the name, please help me, within
Scylla.
The choir of dominions as well. I assume other sovereigns had similar attendance in the dominion class.
You know what I hate? You remember this place? We went here once, really quick, did the little exploration, but like, this map was so cool. This map was so cool. And I don't know, I feel like we don't go back there. Like, bro, I wanted commission. Like, do people really hate daily commissions that much? Like, I miss when we could do the daily commissions that were narrative driven. There's none in Nod Cry. And like, I would always put in the survey, I was like, hey, put commissions in places, like these daily commissions, put them in places where we don't visit often, because they spend so much time making this map and we never go back there. Like, imagine they should have some like daily narrative commission that sends people back to this map at least a couple times. You know what I mean? Like, to spend all that time and then just to do a quick quest there and then write it off, it just seems like such a waste. This place just seems like such a waste. It's so cool.
But there's no information to draw from in-game.
I just hate to see shit go to waste.
The reason I'm not including any Seelies in this choir is because the responsibilities of the Seelies are a much better fit for the next 2 choirs. So I'm going to be sorting the named Seelies into the choirs of Virtue and Power based on what we know about them. Also known as the Authorities, virtues are called the Lords of Causality and the caretakers of the cosmic order within the material world. For this reason, they're associated with fate and thus methods of prophecy like astrology, or perhaps taking care of the branches of Irminsul, which is a tree directly connected to the fate and history of the world. They ensure that things operate as they should, which in Genshin terms probably means that they were responsible for ensuring mankind did not deviate from the mandate of fate issued by the Heavenly Principles. For that reason, we can say that they embody knowledge. Seelies of this choir were likely the ones responsible for guiding mankind and teaching them whatever the Heavenly Principles thought they should know, thus making them the emissaries or messengers of the higher orders, hence divine envoys. Now, we know the names of several important Seelies, 3 of which I think easily fit the mold for virtues, specifically Nicole, Sibylla, and Nabu Malikata.
As long as we are classifying this as old Nicole, okay, like OG Nicole. Current Nicole, way up there, brother. Way up there. This ain't Nicole now. Hey, you think this is Nicole now? Out your
Nicole
goddamn
fancies
mind.
herself a bit of a prophet and observer of Irminsul, as well as an avid historian and teacher.
This is
Likewise,
maybe
Sibylla was a
pre-Hexen Circle
prophetess
Nicole,
stationed
sure.
at the base of one of Irminsul's branches. Nabu Malikata is a little bit trickier to justify at first blush, but she's literally named after a scribe god, and her most infamous feat was bestowing Destrit with forbidden knowledge, so I feel like it kind of makes the most sense to place her in the Virtue Choir. As for the other named Seelies, I kind of feel like they belong in the next choir, the Powers. The Powers are kind of like a warrior class of angels. Their job was to eliminate or restrain evil forces, sometimes through combat and sometimes through purification, and they were also to act as divine intervention on behalf of some humans. For this reason, among others, they embody the concept of direct action. They've also been referred to as sentries or watchmen, and they are tasked with protecting the crossroads and borders of the world, especially the border between heaven and earth. Now, before I address the most interesting implication of that last part, I would like to assign the Seelies Koitar, Yohaltakuten, and Zabai to this choir. While it is true that Koitar was first
Whoa! What the fuck is this doing here? What the fuck is this name doing here? So, nah, Ash, yo, she better remake this fucking video. What the fuck is this name doing here? Why is Alice here? We're completely off our rocker at this point. I mean, I guess she said that these aren't necessarily power rankings, but my brother, ain't no way Alice is right here. What are we talking about?
Of one of Irminsul's branches, like some of the virtues, and she also possessed a gift of prophecy. She was also the leader of the rebellion against heaven, which kind of puts her in a bit of a weird spot. I'm opting to place her in the Power Choir over the Virtue Choir, though, because I personally think that Koitar is someone that we know, but also someone I will not name because now is not the time for a very long explanation. Just know that I'm kind of biased about this placement. Yohaltakuten, on the other hand, might not be noted in any combat-like situations as far as I know, but she did take up guardianship of Natlan by following Renova's instructions to reconstruct the ley lines. This made her quite literally the Lord of the Crossroads, of the Nation of War, no less. And she was in many ways responsible for conquering Natlan as well, or at least instructing humans on how to go about it, so I kind of feel like she fits the description of a power. And then we have Zebai, the Celadon mare, whose placement here is admittedly a bit shaky. She is presumably a former resident of the moon, and she's also called the Daughter of Istaroth, which should make her a better candidate for the Choir of Virtue rather than Power. But if you look at her list of accomplishments, they're all kind of combat-based. She's recorded as having fought extensively alongside the Adepti and Liyue.
This scene right here is the moment I got addicted to Genshin Impact in the story. This right here was so goddamn cool that I was like, yeah, I'm playing this game until I get all the way to the end.
The Archon War, and she also seems to have taken up a sort of guardianship.
This is the one that got me
while
hooked
she waits for
when this game came out.
something to happen, so I kind of think she fits best here. It's possible that once upon a time she was a virtue and then she became a power later. Now, with those placements made, I would like to submit a rather speculative candidate for the power choir here.
Here we go.
I think
What?
This choir perfectly describes Alice. After all, Alice is the protector of Tevat's borders, and protecting the boundaries between heaven and earth is a task that's assigned to the Seelies of the Power Choir. And also, the patron deity of the witches is called Hecate, and Hecate is the guardian of passageways and gateways, and she's usually represented by symbols like keys. And
No.
Alice is a witch.
No.
But for her to belong to the Power Choir, she also kind of needs to be a Seelie, which I think
Yeah,
is
it is.
plausible because she's noted as belonging to a long-lived species, which Seelies definitely are, and her long
Wait, you mean pre-recorded? No. Hello, DB Vegito.
pointed ears make it likely that her lineage is related to the Fae, who are part of the angelic lineage. Although it is worth mentioning that Nicole does have pointy but not long ears, while Zebai doesn't have pointed ears at all. So who knows if there's actually a meaning to the ears. Also, Nicole is both a Seelie and a witch, and Alice is technically her elder, so there's that. And also, there's the fact that Nicole has a solid golden halo around her hat, while Zebai has a golden moon-shaped halo-looking thing that matches our written description of Nabu Malikata's halo horns. And that has made me suspect that Alice's concept of a hat isn't
Yeah, it's a
hat
replay.
at all, but
Nope.
a halo. You can also make the argument that Nicole also protects the borders of Tevat, which should qualify her to be a power instead of a virtue, but she
I'm basically a magician. I can predict everything. Like, I'm predicting right now in this pre-recorded video that Radish is saying that I predicted you showing up. Obviously, it's all prediction. I'm just like I'm a time traveler.
only really does so alongside Alice, and it doesn't really appear to be her top priority or her main assignment. So my guess is that these two kind of help each other out when they can, and there may even be some crossover between powers and virtues.
This whole
Perhaps
chart
we
is
should think of
chalk.
these choirs as more of like job titles that
This
you
whole-
can swap between, but are generally born into. In any case, we don't
This
really
whole
have time to
chart is
dive into
chalk.
all the ways Alice could be a Seelie or why she would therefore be a power. So just, take this with a grain of salt.
Bro, Alice isn't even on this chart. Predict your future. My prediction is that you're gonna lose your next 50-50. Sorry, buddy. I'm sorry. Look, when I'm right, just come back here, tell me I'm right, and then ask me again what my next prediction is. That's all you gotta do, all right?
I'm speculating. But now it's time to move on to our third and final order.
Okay, but real shit, Alice isn't even on this list. There's no reason why she should be here on this list. She isn't a part of the structure. She should not be here. I don't care. No way. There's just no way. Yep, I'm sorry. Look, I don't make the rules. I just tell what I see in the cards for you, buddy.
Is that these two kind of help each other out when they can, and there may even be some crossover between powers and virtues. So perhaps we should think of these choirs as more of like job titles that you can swap between, but are generally born into. In any case, we don't really have time to dive into all the ways Alice could be a Seelie or why she would therefore be a power, so just, take this with a grain of salt. I'm speculating.
Yeah, I am.
But now
Yeah,
it's
you're
time
very
to move on
much
to our
speculating.
third and final order. The third order contains the choirs of principalities, archangels, and guardian angels, most of whom are non-human entities.
Look, there is no negative or positive here. It is only facts. Okay? You can't blame me for what the stars gave you today, okay?
predominantly concerned with the mortal realm, often taking up permanent residence there and making this order the furthest one from God. Now, there's a lot of movement between the choirs of the Third Order. In theory, at least, any angel of the lower two choirs can be promoted into a higher choir. That is to say, archangels and guardian angels can be promoted to principality, and principalities can be demoted into archangels or guardian angels. This is again why I was thinking about them as like job titles that you get born into but can swap between later. And just as a reminder, for this order more than any of the others, it is important to remember that these rankings are not a measure of strength. They are a measure of authority and responsibility.
You need proof though,
now,
buddy.
Let's talk about the highest.
Proof would mean a date. You need to take a screenshot of the date prior to, like, when you start polling, which would be like right now, like today's date, or before today's date, and then after today's date.
Choir of this order, the principalities. Principalities, also known as rulers or princes, are angels that protect, guide, and govern nations or institutions, making them the embodiment of structure within the Third Order. In Tevat, we call the principalities archons, because in Gnostic texts, archons are called princes, and a principality is a government of a prince or a region governed by a prince. The archons govern over nations specifically, so I don't think there's a better fit than this. Principalities are also a little bit like powers in the sense that they also take on the role of a warrior in order to protect their domain. Kind of like how a king or a president is generally head of a military. This meshes really well with Tevat's archons since all of them had to win a war in order to seize their position. They were also given a fragment of heaven's power in the form of the 7 divine thrones that originally belonged to the Ophanim, or the thrones, or the 7 dragon sovereigns, whatever you want to call them. It's kind of like giving them an artificial divine mandate. For what it's worth, I also think the god kings like Deshret, Remus, and Decarabia belong to this choir, and I also think that they may have belonged to the original angelic lineage that made up the principalities before the archons came along, since, you know, they kind of performed the same role. This may even extend to other notable regional deities like Orobashi or Havria, but we know little to nothing about their lineages except for the fact that they were of the human realm. Now, this probably means that they manifested directly from the elements like the next 2 choirs, and if we count Zhongli among their number, then that would make sense. While we don't know where Zhongli came from exactly, we do know that he is the foremost or the progenitor of the Adepti, which could suggest an elemental lineage, or at least that he is the most powerful among the Adepti and thus outranked them even prior to the establishment
of course, he's the oldest.
Which would in turn grant him the position of a principality. Honestly though, Zhongli is not the best example here because he presumably fell to Tevat, which suggests he belonged to a higher order originally. But I think you get my point. This order might actually be a little bit more of a power level comparison than the other 2, which
yeah, it does. It just they're on the human realm. They interact with the mortal realm directly. That's what she's saying. And why you could say like it's just kind of weird to have the dragon authorities up so high too, because of the fact that, you know, New Valet's obviously down here interacting, and the dragons also interacted. The sovereigns, but nah, they kind of didn't. But they do now. So it is kind of weird to have the sovereigns up in the first order.
Which could account for the increased movement between the choirs.
But then again, you could say that if they had direct communication with... but they don't have direct communication with them either.
Regardless, obscured lineages are why none of these figures are on the heritage map. But with the Choir of Principalities complete, we can move on to the murkiest and messiest of the choirs, the Archangels and the Guardian Angels. The Archangel Choir is primarily responsible for carrying out the orders of the principalities, so I kind of like to think of them as those who are like second in command, but who don't really involve themselves too much with human affairs unless they have to. Still, they are also keepers of what little divine knowledge those of the sublunary sphere are allowed to have, which lets them use a wide variety of magic. So right away, we can assign the yokai, yaksha, and other adepti into this choir, seeing as they are followers of the Electro and Geo Archons respectively. And likewise, I'll include the Oceanids, who were allegedly made by and served the Hydro Archon Egeria. I think the elusive, avoidant nature of the aforementioned angels kind of illustrates what I mean.
I know she's trying to match the, whatever that the celestial hierarchy thing, but I don't think that the dragon sovereigns would be here. I don't know about that.
the genealogy chart to find our perfect candidate, the 7 dragon sovereigns.
Like they don't hold the same. They have nowhere close to the same weight as these guys do, in my opinion. Like there's no way. Like Devon interacts. All of these guys have interacted with humanity, the mortal side. If anything, they'd be second order. Like they honestly, I feel like they fit more into powers than what she's having it here.
Also possessed a gift of prophecy. She was also the certain that we know that I'm and for the choir.
You know? Yeah, I don't know. But we'll keep it going. We'll keep it going. Let's keep it going. Archangels.
Oitar, and who serve the Tsaritsa and the Belit Tsar, as well as the Jinn and the Simurgh, both of whom were created by and served Nabu Malikata and also Deshret. I'm also including Andrias in this tier because he challenged Decarabia and Venti for the position of Archon originally, and he also received his powers from a second order angel, and he ended up becoming one of Venti's 4 winds of Mondstadt, which kind of makes him a second in command. But that said, Dvalin is also technically one of the 4 winds, and I'm also still convinced that he is the Animo Sovereign, so he should qualify as a throne. But then you have to argue for that really weird relationship between the Elemental Dragon thrones and the Archons, and I don't want to do that, so let's just move on to our final choir, the Guardian Angels.
Yeah, even she seems on edge about it a little bit.
Presumably embody the concept of action, as they are supposed to be the ones most involved in the affairs of the mortal realm, but not necessarily humans. Although they can be guardians of humans, as we see with the Aranara. But most of the time they're tasked with protecting the mortal realm from lesser evils, which in Teyvat is probably the Abyss. So first up, we have the Pari, the result of a union between the Simurgh and Egeria's remains. They're little light-based nature spirits that do work alongside mankind, but mostly busy themselves with the natural world. So very similar to the Aranara. I think the Wayab also fit within the Guardian Choir as spirits who literally guide and guard the tribes of Natlan. I think there's a good case to be made for their submission into the Archangel Choir too, but I'm kind of gonna ignore it. Similarly, I think the lowest ranking dragons like Saurians and Bishops should also fall into this category as they perform a guardian role for the land, and also because dragons are more or less manifestations of nature in general, so I do think we should consider them to be sort of mortalish nature spirits to some degree. Incidentally, I also think that this tier should include Venti, like Venti's original form as that tiny little wind sprite, partly because he was like the size of a little Pari. He was certainly not of an archangel rank, which would imply that Venti was the lowest ranked angel to make it through the Archon War and become a principality. And if that's true, I think it's pretty cool. Now, for the big question, where do crystal flies factor into this equation? Well, they don't. By virtue of their limited cognition, they don't really qualify as an angel at all. Due to their lack of sentience, their divinity has become too diluted to even justify the lowest of rankings. And I think a lot of things in Teyvat kind of fall into this category. Now look, I know I didn't rank everything, but I think I did enough to where you could kind of just fill in the blanks. I think the rules and conditions are pretty well defined, and frankly, that's good enough for me. So I think we'll leave it there. But before I go, I would love to thank all of my lovely channel members for putting up with my nonsense and supporting me. Especially because they never know what they're really gonna get. You could get a crazy theory, you could get a recap video, you could get something like this, which was completely unexpected. Like really, who thought I was gonna be making one of these? I bet none of you, not a single one of you. It was a surprise. A good surprise or a bad surprise, I don't know, but it was a surprise.
That's a good surprise.
Keep you on your toes. But thank you guys, I appreciate it. And also, a very big thanks to you, dear viewer, for watching. And also to Eneba for sponsoring this video. I appreciate that as well. I am off on my...
That was good. I think I don't like the dragons. I think she's trying to relate it too much to the celestial hierarchy thing and follow all of that, but it doesn't have to be one-to-one, you know what I mean? So I feel like you could drop the dragons out of this Ophanum, just remove that completely and just move them to second order. I don't think they rank like moons and shades are just up there, brother. And where do sinners come into play now? What about the sinners? None yet. Everything is angel, but ultimately everything is dragon. See, this guy gets it. This guy knows. Oh.
So I've had this. Yeah, I am so fast.
No.
But see,
Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Can't just say, I think we know what Koi Tire is and then not elaborate on it. Either Cryo Archon or Mage B. It's definitely Tholindus. Official. Okay. Well, you know what? This is why I don't trust any of you. Still a good video. W video. W video. Oh, man. Dude, I am ready for the live stream on Friday. I am ready to get juiced up on some information. I am ready to figure out the next story. And it really feels like it was just yesterday we were finishing this quest, dude. That's crazy. I did want to watch this too, but I don't know if I want to do a whole nother 40-minute video right now, bro. Maybe I save this one for tomorrow. Save men's lifts for tomorrow. Since we did just watch these two. Got some good Ashikai lore in there as a nice comeback. I hope everyone had a nice holiday. Nice holiday. But yeah, dude. It's been great. Alright, I think I'm gonna go play Where Winds Meet on Twitch. But yeah, so YouTube, peace out. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch me play Where Winds Meet, I will be live on Twitch. So, peace out, YouTube.